Hey guys, tonight we take a quiet walk into a time you probably wouldn't survive, the medieval world. It was cold, it was dirty, and everything took a very long time. No internet, no coffee, no running water, no bathroom you'd want to enter. In this slow, sleepy journey, we'll explore why you, yes you, probably wouldn't last a full day in the Middle Ages, so lay down. Let the flicker of torchlight guide you. Close your eyes and drift into the boring, uncomfortable world of medieval life. Your first breath of the day is mostly smoke. That's because you've been sleeping in the same single-room cottage where your family cooks dinner, dries clothes, and stores the pig when it rains. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that does not do its job. Your lungs are getting a medieval exfoliation courtesy of years-old soot and wood smoke. The bed, or more accurately, the pile of straw, is crawling with lice. Not metaphorically. You scratch your shoulder and something skitters away. Your tunic, which you've worn for 3 weeks without washing, smells like wool and regret. If you're lucky, it has only one kind of body fluid on it. Your siblings are already awake, stepping over your legs. One of them kicks you in the ribs, probably on purpose. There's no such thing as personal space. In fact, there's barely room for you and the family goat. Guess who's breathing on your face right now? You stagger upright. Your head thunks the low beam with a hollow thud. No one reacts. That's normal here. The floor is hard-packed earth littered with straw animal droppings and bits of yesterday's dinner-stewed cabbage and barley, judging by the smell. Your feet are bare and filthy. There are no socks. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are 2 cracked leather flaps tied with twine. Outside, a rooster crows as if on commission. You unlatch the heavy wooden door and step out into the dawn haze. Mist clings to the fields. The village is quiet, except for the lowing of cows and the occasional farting sound from your neighbor's oxen. The air is damp. Your breath steams, and your day is about to get much, much worse. You stretch your sore arms and realize that your entire upper body is somehow both frozen and sticky. There's no such thing as deodorant. Baths happen maybe once a season if the weather and your lord allow. And it's not like you have a mirror to check the damage. Fun fact. Most people in medieval villages never saw their own faces in clear detail. Polished metal was the closest thing to a mirror, and even then, it wasn't exactly flattering. You shuffle behind the house to relieve yourself. Welcome to the medieval bathroom, a pit in the ground surrounded by weeds and shame. You swat away a swarm of flies and attempt to balance your dignity and your body weight on a slick wooden plank. Toilet paper, huh? Try moss, or if you're lucky, a dry clump of hay. Now here's a little known detail. Many homes had a chamber pot inside, especially in winter. And yes, that means you slept just a few feet away from a sloshing bowl of human waste. Sweet dreams. You return inside, stepping carefully around the hearth fire which has smoldered all night. There's no central heating, just this one smoky flame. If it dies, you're in trouble. Firelighting tools are rare, and starting a new blaze from scratch can take hours. Some families actually carried hot coals between houses in metal pans to keep the flame alive. Your mother, already awake, ladles a thick grey porridge into a wooden bowl. It's barley again, maybe with a hint of leek. No sugar, no milk, certainly no cinnamon. Just salt if you're blessed. You sit on a wobbly stool and begin to eat. With your hands. The family owns 2 spoons, both splintered. You burned your mouth on the porridge yesterday, so today you blow on it. It doesn't help. As you chew, you glance around. The walls are made of wattle and daub, woven sticks, smeared with mud and straw. They're not even pretending to keep the wind out. Rain has eroded the lower corners. A spider the size of a copper coin watches you from the ceiling. Your father straps on his belt a literal rope with a pouch and heads out to the fields. He doesn't say goodbye. No one does. Life is too short for sentiment, and honestly, breakfast isn't worth remembering. You finish the last of your meal. The bowl gets licked clean by the dog. Then it's back to your day's work. And that, my modern friend, is just your morning. Mainstream fact of the section: most peasants lived in one-room huts made of wattle and daub with no chimney, and animals sharing the living space. Quirky, fringe tidbit. Some villagers believe keeping a toad in the corner of the room would ward off light. Spoiler, it didn't. Scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly as filthy as records suggest, or whether church chroniclers exaggerated their conditions to contrast with monastic life. You trudge out into the soft mud behind your hut, feet half frozen and squelching unpleasantly. The sun is barely up the sky and ashy grey, and there's already a line forming by the latrine pit. Congratulations, you live in a village with a communal privy. If you think that sounds quaint, wait until the wind shifts. Let's talk about the bathroom situation, or rather the near total absence of it. Your village's privy is a plank over a deep pit dug just beyond the last row of cabbage patches. It smells exactly like you'd expect a hole full of decades of human waste to smell, and yet it's considered a luxury. Many villagers just squat in the woods. Others use chamber pots and chuck them out the front door like some sort of cursed morning ritual. Streets in towns are even worse. Picture narrow alleys, little windows up above, and suddenly, splash someone's breakfast exits the third floor with zero warning. You scan the bushes for your privacy spot. Joke's on you. The concept of privacy hasn't been invented yet. Everything is communal. You've got about 5 minutes before a goat wanders past, or a child comes screaming after a loose chicken. Let's say you manage to find a semi-secluded area. You crouch. You do your business. And then what's the cleanup plan? Moss leaves. A scrap of linen torn from last season's ruined undergarment. Toilet paper won't be invented for another few hundred years, and when it does show up, it's for the ultra-rich. The rest of the population makes do with natural solutions. Some even use shells. We don't talk about those people. Oh, and remember your hands. Those will be very important later. Medieval folks weren't big on soap, and hand washing was more of a polite suggestion than a public health standard. Water from the village stream is shared by people, animals' laundry, and the occasional dead rat. Cleanliness, like literacy, is reserved for monks. You get back to your hut trying to ignore the itch that's already forming. Parasites are a part of everyday life. Lice live in your clothing. Fleas infest the bedding. Worms, well, they're practically neighbors. That odd cramping in your belly, that might not be the porridge. That might be your new tapeworm friend saying hello. In cities, it gets even worse. Open gutters line the streets called kennels, and they're filled with black sludge, animal droppings, and sometimes fingers. Yeah, occasionally human fingers turn up. You don't ask. And what happens when all this unsanitary glory leads to infection? Say you get a scratch and it festers. You develop a fever. What do? You pray. And maybe drink a herbal tea. And possibly have a leech applied to your face. But we'll get to that delightful part later. One curious belief floating around at this time is that bad smells cause disease. The prevailing theory of miasma, that illness floats in on foul air, means people are constantly burning herbs or carrying sweet-smelling pouches under their noses. These don't help your stomach parasites, but at least they distract you from the stench of the fishmonger's cart parked in the sun. In fact, the wealthier townsfolk often wear Pomander's perfume-filled balls, worn on chains or sewn into hats. Some were shaped like skulls or miniature coffins, because nothing says, "I'm rich and smell better than you," like wearing your own tiny death-themed air freshener. Meanwhile, you're swatting flies with a tree branch, praying you don't step barefoot into something squishy and warm. Fun times. And while you're out here navigating medieval sanitation, with all the grace of a wet sock, let's not forget the outhouse ghost stories. Yes, these exist. Many villagers believe that evil spirits linger in latrine pits, especially at night. Which, let's be honest, would explain a few of the smells. You shuffle over to the stream to wash up. It's cloudy, full of algae, and downstream from 3 cow pastures. Still, you splash it on your face because, well, what else are you going to do? The cold stings your skin. Your hands are raw. There's a dead frog floating nearby. You try not to think about what just splashed into your mouth. This isn't just a peasant problem. Castles, too, were shockingly unhygienic. Yes, they had guardrobes, those famous toilets built into the walls that drop waste down a chute. But there was no system to clean what landed below. Imagine a castle wall with a permanent splat zone. Royalty literally rained down upon their peasants. And if the wind was wrong, let's just say your dignity and your cloak didn't stand a chance. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were truly as filthy as records describe. Some suggest that these accounts were exaggerated by later reformers to make their own eras look more advanced. Others argue we're underestimating the medieval tolerance for smells and sludge. After all, if everyone's gross, no one really notices. And here's a fun fringe tidbit to chew on. Not literally, please, in some regions, dried animal dung was used as fuel. Yes, cow patties. Collected, stacked and burned indoors. And no, the smell does not burn off cleanly. By the time you've made it back to your hut, you're already sweating again. You itch in places you'd rather not discuss. And your stomach. That's not a good sound. The outhouse might see you again sooner than you'd hoped. Back inside the hut, your stomach groans ominously like an old wooden door. Breakfast is coming, and you'd better adjust your expectations now. The fire in the hearth has been coaxed back to life by your mother, who's stirring a pot of what looks like beige sludge. You already know what it is, gruel. Not a cute nickname. Just boiled grain water, and maybe a pinch of salt if someone in the family recently traded away an egg. You sit cross-legged on the dirt floor as she ladles out a portion into a wooden bowl. Everyone eats in order, starting with your father. You're somewhere down the line behind your siblings and the family dog. You pick up your bowl and stare into it. There are exactly 4 identifiable ingredients. Barley water, 1 thin sliver of leek and hope. You inhale. It smells faintly of boiled socks. Now, before you judge this meal too harshly, remember, this is actually a good day. There's food. Some days there isn't. Some days you chew stale bread you have to dunk in water so it doesn't crack a tooth. Other days, it's pottage, a perpetual stew, made by tossing whatever's on hand into the pot and keeping it simmering for days, even weeks. No one knows what's at the bottom anymore. Best not to ask. You take a bite. It's warm. It's filling. It tastes like someone once heard of seasoning. You chew slowly, counting the lumps. At least the barley is cooked today. Your siblings are making disgusting slurping sounds. One of them sneezes directly into the pot, and no one bats an eye. Germ theory is centuries away. Let's talk about breakfast in medieval Europe. If you're a peasant and you are, breakfast is usually simple porridge, black bread, maybe a bit of cheese, if the goat was feeling generous that week. Occasionally, you get eggs, which is basically Christmas in a bowl. Meat is rare, mostly reserved for holy days, or when something dies unexpectedly. Even then, it has to be salted, dried, or smoked to avoid going bad within hours. The upper classes, of course, eat better, but not always smarter. Wealthy nobles start their day with white bread, wine, cheese, and fruits. They believe that raw vegetables are dangerous, and some even think bathing after eating causes illness. One 14th century French nobleman swore by eating preserved plums soaked in rosewater to purify the bile. Charming, useless. You glance at the hearth where your mother is now baking flat cakes on a hot stone. These aren't treats, they're oatcakes, and they're basically prehistoric pancakes. Dry, chewy, and capable of doubling as emergency roof shingles. In coastal villages, breakfast might include dried fish, pickled herring if you're lucky, salt cod if you're not. It smells like brine despair and wet rope. Across medieval Europe, mealtimes are regulated by strict religious rules. You're technically not supposed to eat before morning mass, which isn't ideal when you're working in the fields before sunrise. Monks follow elaborate eating schedules based on prayer hours. Meanwhile, you follow a much simpler rule. Eat when food exists. There's no coffee. Let's take a moment to mourn that. There's no tea either, unless you're in China or a very well-traveled merchant. You drink ale, which is weak and cloudy and safer than water. Even children drink it. Sometimes it's flavored with herbs or tree bark. Sometimes it's accidentally fermented wrong and gives you hallucinations. Either way, bottoms up. Here's a quirky little fact. Medieval recipes often include instructions like add enough salt to please a lord or boil until the moon is high. Not exactly scientific, but they worked with what they had, and what they had was usually stale. You finish your bowl and set it aside. The dog licks it clean, tail wagging. It'll be washed later, probably with sand and cold water. Maybe a rag. Now, as your belly fills and your brain starts to wake up, you make the mistake of thinking, this might not be so bad. Then you sneeze. Once, then twice. Uh-oh. A sneeze in medieval times is no small thing. It could be dust. It could be the start of a head cold. Or it could be the opening act of the bubonic plague. Everyone pretends not to notice, but your mother is already muttering a short prayer under her breath. You wipe your nose on your sleeve. No tissues here, friend. Just wool and denial. One scholarly debate still lingers. Did medieval peasants eat better than we assume, or were they mostly malnourished? Some evidence shows seasonal access to fresh veggies and legumes, suggesting a more varied diet than we imagine. Other records describe chronic famines and nutritional deficiencies. Maybe it depended on the year, or the lord, or the weather. Either way, you don't exactly have a food pyramid on the wall. In fact, your main food group is whatever didn't spoil yet. There are no supermarkets, of course. Everything you eat is local, seasonal, and repetitive. Lentils, onions, cabbage, barley. Repeat. You remember hearing that spices existed, but they're for the wealthy. Cinnamon, saffron, cloves. These are hoarded by nobles or monks with good trade routes. You've never even seen a lemon. Now here's something you wouldn't expect in some places. Breakfast was considered suspicious, especially among the upper clergy. Eating too early was thought to tempt gluttony, a sin. Some monasteries banned it entirely unless you were sick or elderly, and even then it had to be bland, which means your sad porridge technically sinful in some circles. You stretch your sore limbs and grab your work tools. Breakfast is over. Time to start the real suffering. Your stomach already feels like it's planning a revenge arc. You burp quietly and pray to Saint Zita, patron saint of domestic servants. Or maybe Saint Lawrence, patron of cooks. Anyone really. You'll take all the divine digestive help you can get. Welcome to the full medieval food experience, beige, boiled and bowel related. You tug on your tunic, trying not to scratch at the seams. It's made of coarse homespun wool, itchy enough to double as sandpaper. There's no lining, no tag, no sizing. Just one universal style potato sack with sleeves. It's the same thing you've worn every day for weeks, and it's starting to smell like your breakfast's evil twin. Getting dressed in the Middle Ages isn't about fashion, it's about survival and legality. That's right, you don't just wear what you like. Sumptuary laws exist to make sure you know your place, literally. In most regions, the colors, fabrics, and accessories you're allowed to wear are dictated by your social class. Want to wear purple? Sorry, that's for royalty. Fur trim? Not unless you're nobility. Silk, dream on. So what do you get? Wool. Sometimes linen if it's warm, or if you've somehow stumbled into a decent harvest. Underwear, a loose linen shift if you're lucky. But most days you're going commando under that tunic. It's breezy in all the wrong ways. Your belt is a piece of rope. Not for fashion, it's holding your tools. Your knife, maybe a pouch, with exactly one crumb of yesterday's bread. There's no wardrobe variety. You own maybe 2 outfits. If one gets wet, you wear the other until it dries. If both get wet, you get hypothermia and a possible death sentence by sniffles. Let's talk shoes. Technically, what you're wearing counts leather turn shoes cut and stitched by the village cobbler. They're thin, flat, and about as protective as wet cardboard. Step on a sharp stone and your toes meet the Middle Ages head on. And socks are for monks and rich people. You might have rags tied around your feet if it's cold. By the way, shoelaces are rare. Most peasant shoes are held together with twine straps or hope. Now imagine you're a woman. Dressing is twice as frustrating. You've got the same rough woolen fabric layered under a heavier outer gown called a kirtle. No zippers, no buttons. Lacing takes forever, especially without a mirror. And once it's on, it's on. There's no easy bathroom break in this outfit. Your head is likely covered with a veil or coif, not for modesty so much as lice prevention. And here's the kicker, you must dress according to your station. If a commoner is caught wearing clothing too fine for their class, they can be fined, publicly shamed, or even jailed. Yes, jailed. For wearing the wrong color. You glance down. Your tunic is dyed a dull grey brown. It's not a color so much as a resignation. That's probably for the best. Natural dyes cost a fortune and fade fast. Most of what you wear comes in the same palette as dirt dust and old porridge. Mainstream fact of the day. Sumptuary laws were a very real part of medieval life, strictly regulating what people could wear based on class, gender, and profession. Want a fringe detail? In some villages, unmarried women wore their hair loose to show their status. Once married hair had to be covered, because clearly your braid was just too provocative. And did you know some garments were soaked in lye to bleach them lye? As in the same caustic substance used to make soap and dissolve other things. You wore it next to your skin and wondered why you had a rash for 3 weeks. Back in your hut, your little brother is trying to tie his tunic with one hand, while eating a hunk of oatcake with the other. Multitasking. Your mother tugs a comb through your sister's hair, a wooden one, with widely spaced teeth. It doesn't really detangle so much as drag the lice into submission. There's a huge open debate among historians about hygiene-related clothing practices. Did medieval people frequently change and wash their underlayers, as some recent studies suggest? Or were they perpetually coated in filth and dead skin cells like a human onion? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. But for your purposes, you're itchy, smelly, and vaguely flammable from the cooking smoke. Speaking of fire, you tug on your wool cloak full of smoke holes and scorched edges and step outside. Your outfit is heavy and damp. It smells like everything in your life, ash, wet wool and goat. But here's a moment of brightness. Some villagers personalize their outfits with little tokens. A colored stitch, a wooden brooch, a small leather pouch with an herb bundle tucked inside. They don't have much, but they make it theirs. Maybe your pouch has a sprig of rosemary, not for fashion, for the smell, because frankly you need it. You pass your neighbor on the way to the fields. He's wearing almost the exact same thing. Everyone looks more or less identical, except for the occasional wool cap or patchwork repair. You greet him with a nod. No words. It's too early for conversation. And no one has brushed their teeth. You scratch your collarbone for the 10th time. Is it the fabric? Is it lice? Is it just your soul rejecting the entire experience? Probably all three. And just when you think you've gotten used to this daily dressing routine, you hear the distant bell from the manor house. A summons. The Lord wants all able-bodied men for a levy count. You groan. That means standing in line for an hour in the cold while someone evaluates whether you're fit for military service based on how many teeth you have and whether you look likely to survive a week of marching. Spoiler, you don't. You side-shift your belt and start walking. As your shoes slap against the frost-hardened ground and your tunic clings to your thighs like a wet tent, you wonder, how did anyone survive this century with dignity intact? Answer, they didn't. But they did get very, very good at patching holes in everything, including their patience. You're outside now. Wool tunic clinging to your knees, the cold morning mist soaking into the fabric like a curse. Your breath huffs in clouds. The sun is just starting to burn through the haze, and already you're ankle deep in mud. Time to go to work. You're not clocking in at an office. There's no keyboard, no coffee machine, no team meeting that could have been an email. Your job is keeping yourself and your family barely alive, and that means farming. You are officially a serf. That's not a job title. It's a life sentence. As a serf, you're tied to the land like a cow, but with worse benefits. You don't own your home. You don't own your field. You don't even really own your own body. Your Lord does. You can't leave the manor without permission. You can't hunt in the Lord's forest. And you owe him part of every harvest plus random days of unpaid labor called corvée. Think of it as a subscription service for feudalism. You pass other villagers on the way to the fields, each carrying tools older than their grandparents. No shiny plows here, just wooden spades, rusted sickles, and an attitude of resigned suffering. Your destination, the strip field system. It's agriculture by spreadsheet. Each peasant family gets a few long, narrow strips of land scattered across a larger field. Why scattered? So no one hogs all the good soil. Fairness, medieval style. You trudge through one strip and start turning soil with a heavy, crooked hoe. No gloves, no sunscreen, no ergonomics. Your palms blister fast. Your back starts to throb. The wind cuts through your cloak like it's not even there. Today you're digging and planting. Tomorrow might be weeding, or hauling, or muck spreading, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate just how much work is involved in subsistence farming. No tractors, no fertilizer, no irrigation system. You plant by hand, you harvest by hand, you haul everything by hand or by oxen that you're constantly afraid will drop dead of hoof rot. You feel a rock shift under your heel and nearly fall into the furrow. You catch yourself barely and groan. That's going to bruise. You hope it's not broken because there's no doctor, just an herbalist who thinks spiderwebs cure sprains. Across the field, a woman your age is carrying a massive basket of manure on her head. She does it while holding a baby on her hip and shouting at a goat. That goat is ignoring her. It knows no laws. The sun climbs higher. You sweat through your tunic. You itch. You stink. And your reward, maybe a few coins worth of barley after the Lord's tax, the church tithe, and the grain you have to save to plant next year. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval peasants spent 60-80% of their time working in agriculture, bound to manorial estates and obligated to give a large share of their labor and produce to their local lord. The rules aren't always written down, but you know them. If the lord rides past on his horse, you stop what you're doing and bow. If the bailiff says jump, you ask how high, then jump higher. If you steal even a single turnip from someone else's strip, you could be fined, whipped, or thrown in the stocks. Stocks, by the way, are wooden devices where your head and hands are locked in place for public humiliation. Children throw mud. Adults sometimes throw worse. And all this over a vegetable. You pause to wipe your forehead with your sleeve. Big mistake, it smears more dirt into your eyes. You blink. You swear. Not out loud, though. That could be considered blasphemy. Fun fringe tidbit. Some medieval villages believed that swearing during planting season would anger the wheat. Crops were sensitive, apparently. By midday, you're half dead. Your muscles are trembling. Your knees hurt. You've developed a new appreciation for soft furniture, and Advil, neither of which exist. Your lunch, maybe some leftover oatcakes, and a hunk of onion wrapped in cloth. You sit under a tree to eat it while keeping one eye on your tools, because theft is a thing even among neighbors. The weather is always your enemy. Too much rain and the crops rot. Too little and the fields crack open. A cold spring, everything dies. A late frost, dead again. Sometimes birds take the seeds. Sometimes a cow gets loose and tramples half a season's work in 5 minutes. And yet you keep going. Because you have to. Even when you're sick. Even when you're pregnant. Even when your back feels like it's made of splinters and betrayal. It's hard to overstate how grinding this life is. People often imagine that medieval peasants only worked a few hours a day. Sure, there were religious feast days and the occasional fair, but when you were working, it was brutal, repetitive, and relentless. You swing the hoe again. Your hand slips. It connects with your shin. You wince hard. Blood wells up and dirt clings to the wound. No band-aids, just spit and hope. There's a distant shout, the bailiff calling for corvée labourers to repair the manor fence. That's not your job today, but you might get volunteered. Again, some historians argue that despite the hardship, peasants had a certain resilience, a deep connection to the land, a sense of community and shared endurance. Maybe that's true, but at this moment you mostly feel tired, hungry, and vaguely betrayed by history textbooks that made this sound kind of romantic. You stare out at the field stretching endlessly into the horizon, knowing you'll never own them, never escape them, never even get a decent pair of gloves to work them. This land isn't yours, but your pain, that's 100% yours. It's Monday. Not that you own a calendar. You know it's Monday because yesterday was church. Your only day off from farming, if you can call kneeling on a stone floor for 3 hours rest. Now you're back at it, sore-kneed and sleep-deprived, trudging into another week of medieval life. And Mondays are rough. The phrase medieval Monday may not be a thing in modern slang, but it absolutely should be. Because this is the day when the petty problems of your tiny village come bubbling to the surface like questionable stew. First task, tend to the chickens. They're already squawking at you like you personally offended them in a past life. You scatter some seed, half of which they ignore, and duck as one particularly aggressive hen takes aim at your face. You remind yourself not to snap. There are witnesses. Your neighbour, the one with one good eye and an impressively judgmental stare, watches you from her porch. She's definitely the source of at least 5 of this week's rumours. Gossip is the lifeblood of this village. Forget Wi-Fi, these people operate on pure word of mouth, and nothing spreads faster than a scandal. Did your mother trade 2 eggs for a comb? That's suspiciously extravagant. Did your brother walk too close to the widow's fence? Clearly he's plotting something. And don't even ask about the miller's apprentice. He sneezed near the bread oven last week, and people are still whispering about it. Speaking of ovens, it's your family's turn to use the communal bakehouse. You carry your lump of dense, unleavened dough, basically edible masonry, down the muddy lane. The bakehouse is already sweltering. The baker grunts and takes your loaf, adding it to a queue of equally sad-looking breads, marked with unique family symbols. You'll come back in a few hours and hope no one stole yours. Your stomach rumbles in the meantime. Again, by late morning, you're called to assist in clearing debris from a recent storm. A thatched roof collapsed near the edge of the village. You're not a carpenter, but that doesn't matter. If you have a pulse and 2 limbs, you're eligible for community labour. You grab a splintered beam, hoist it onto your shoulder, and immediately regret every life choice you've made, including being born. Now here's a bit of medieval reality you might not expect villages police themselves. There's no police force, no official detectives. Justice is dished out by bailiffs, local reeves, or church officials. If someone breaks a law, or more likely just steps on the wrong toes, it's up to the community to hold them accountable. And on Mondays, people love to stir the pot. This afternoon, the village reeve gathers everyone in the square. There's been an incident. The blacksmith's son was caught stealing apples from the manor orchard. The crowd murmurs. Theft from the Lord's trees. That's dangerous territory. He's marched forward, sullen and muddy. The reeve questions him. The boy denies everything. The widow from the far end of the village claims she saw it happen, but she also once accused a cloud of stealing her laundry, so Historians still argue whether village justice was more democratic than we think, as one scholar put it. Trials were often held by view of neighbours, meaning everyone who saw or even heard something gets a say. Which sounds fair, until you realise how many people base their testimonies on vibes. The Reeve nods solemnly. Punishment one day in the stocks. The boy pales. You help haul the wooden frame into the middle of the square and lock him in. He sits awkwardly, feet and hands sticking out, trying to act brave. A toddler throws a handful of mud. Someone else offers bread, mostly as a joke. The crowd disperses quickly. They've seen it all before. You head to the stream to wash the sweat and grime from your hands. The water is colder than your expectations for this week. Let's talk about work schedules. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did get breaks. There were feast days, plenty of them, thanks to the church calendar. But that didn't mean downtime. Women still had to cook, clean, tend to children, and care for sick relatives. Men often had side obligations, mending tools, tending animals, helping with building repairs. You didn't really stop working. You just changed what kind of work you were doing. And there were social obligations too. Tonight is ale night at the village tavern. More of a thatched shack with sticky tables, really. But it's where people go to unwind, share stories, trade goods, and let out a little of the week's pressure. You might go. Or you might just collapse on your straw mattress and stare at the roof for 4 hours, mentally cataloguing all the new places your tunic itched today. By sunset, your body is a patchwork of soreness. Your feet hurt. Your hands are red and raw. Your back feels like it's about to file a formal complaint. And there's still dinner to deal with. You help stir a pot of thin broth made from cabbage, turnips, and regret. It bubbles over and spills into the fire, sending up a hiss of steam and smoke that makes your eyes water. Someone drops a spoon. It's the only one you have. You eat with your fingers. Your little sister falls asleep mid-chew. She's snoring gently against the edge of the hearth. You almost envy her. Just before bed, you check the family goat. She looks at you with the same disdain she's had all day. You can't blame her. And as you crawl back into your hay-stuffed mattress, still damp from last night's dew, and vaguely alive with bugs, you think if this was only Monday, how much worse can the rest of the week get? Spoiler, much worse. Tuesday greets you not with a sunrise, but with your mother yelling about the goat escaping again. You shoot upright hair matted from last night's damp pillow and dash out barefoot into the muddy yard. Sure enough, the goat, Marjorie, eternal agent of chaos, is halfway to the neighbour's turnip patch, already chomping like she's training for a vegetable eating competition. You manage to wrangle her back, but not before she knocks over a bucket, rips your sleeve and makes prolonged eye contact with a passing rooster, who is clearly scandalized. So begins Tuesday. Goat wrangling turnip diplomacy, and a growing awareness that your life is less rustic pastoral bliss and more constant barnyard emergency. You get your chores done with a bit more speed than usual though, because today holds something special. It's market day. Not a market in your village, of course. You're way too small and remote for that. But a few miles away in the market town that hosts a weekly gathering. Traders, farmers, peddlers and scammers. They prefer the term opportunists assemble to buy, sell, barter, gossip, and occasionally get into passive-aggressive fights over onion prices. You're going. You grab the family's little basket of goods, some eggs, a rough linen pouch of dried herbs, and a wooden spoon you carved yourself. A masterpiece, really slightly crooked, but charmingly so. Your journey begins with a long trudge along rutted tracks, dodging puddles that definitely contain more than just water. The countryside rolls past hedges, thatched roofs, occasional angry geese. You cross a small wooden bridge that creaks ominously beneath your feet. Don't think about it. Eventually, you round a bend, and there it is, the town. It's underwhelming. A scattering of crooked buildings, a half-tilted church tower, several chickens on the loose. But the place buzzes. Market stalls line the square, and people mill around in waves of colour noise and the smell of slightly spoiled cheese. You dive in. There's a man selling dyed wool, loudly insisting it came from royal sheep. A woman offers hot pies, definitely questionable. One booth is selling what might be spices or possibly sawdust. It's all a little overwhelming, but you love it. You trade your herbs for a small roll of cloth and your spoon for a hunk of cheese that smells like regret, but tastes surprisingly decent. The eggs get you 2 apples and a handful of salted nuts. No coin changes hands. Barter is the law of the land, especially for peasants. A mainstream fact. Here you go. In medieval England, coinage did exist, but most rural folk operated primarily on a barter system, especially in smaller markets where money was in short supply, and credit often meant, "I'll owe you next week, don't die before then." You overhear a conversation between 2 older men, debating whether the king's new taxes will apply to beehives. One swears his bees are free citizens. The other thinks he's an idiot. You don't weigh in, but you tuck that one away. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day people pay taxes in eels. Really? In some places, a tenant might owe 300 eels a year to his landlord. Imagine chasing eels with a deadline. Talk about slippery obligations. As you wander the market, something shiny catches your eye. A small mirror, a luxury, polished metal. No glass, of course, but enough to see a warped, wavy reflection of your mud-streaked face. The merchant wants 2 hens for it. You don't have hens. You do have a handful of nuts and a winning smile. It doesn't work. Still you linger. That's the thing about market day. It's less about the goods and more about the exchange. Not just of things, but of information. You hear rumors about far-off towns, whispers of plague outbreaks always, and a curious tale about a man who dug too deep in his field and uncovered the bones of a giant. Historians still argue whether such stories reflected folklore or early attempts at local fame. Then out of nowhere, a street performance. A juggler appears. His props just sticks and rocks, but he has the crowd's full attention. A musician strums a lute with questionable tuning. A healer claims his powdered toadstools will cure everything from gout to heartbreak. They won't. You stand and watch momentarily free from goat's chores and rotting cabbages. The juggler winks at you. You try to wink back. Fail. That's fine. No one notices. Soon it's time to head home. You shoulder your now empty basket. Well, not entirely empty. You kept one of the apples for yourself. It's slightly bruised. You eat it anyway. The walk back feels longer. Your feet are sore. Your back hurts again. Your arms feel like they're made of poorly woven sackcloth. You pass the same angry goose from earlier, and it looks even angrier. At home, your mother examines your trades. She raises an eyebrow at the cheese. She raises both eyebrows at the cloth. You brace for scolding, but she just sighs and uses the fabric to patch a hole in her sleeve. Small victories. Dinner is better than usual cheese nuts and wild greens. No stew tonight. A true feast. Even Marjorie the goat seems temporarily less judgmental. You lie back in the yard as the stars come out. No streetlights here. Just a dome of inky blackness with pinpricks of light. You trace constellations you've named yourself the bored farmer, the escaping chicken, and the eternal mud patch. Your sister joins you. She's still small enough to believe that market days are magical. You don't correct her. Let her have that. And as you drift off warm from food and half sunburned from walking, you realize today was exhausting. But it was kind of fun. Don't get used to it. Tomorrow, you find yourself face to face with the one thing you fear most medieval medicine. The next morning, your eye is swollen. At first, you think it's just sleep crust, or maybe a particularly aggressive mosquito bite. But no, your reflection in the water trough confirms it. Your left eye looks like someone stuffed half a plum under the lid and dared it to swell further. Your mother gasps. Your little sister is fascinated. Even Marjorie the goat looks mildly concerned, which is deeply unsettling. You blink a few times hoping it'll just go away. It doesn't. You try washing it with cold water. Nope. You try holding a cabbage leaf against it. That only makes you smell like cabbage. Eventually, your mother clucks her tongue and makes the dreaded pronouncement. We'll have to call the healer. Now let's be clear. In medieval times, a healer could mean a lot of things. Maybe it's a local herbalist who knows her nettles from a nightshade. Or maybe it's a traveling wise man who thinks ghosts live in your belly. There's no certification board, no Yelp reviews, just hope and herbs. The healer who arrives is somewhere in between. She's older, draped in layers of fabric, and smells like dried rosemary and something faintly smoky. She introduces herself as Editha. She has exactly 3 teeth and a disturbingly confident smile. She takes one look at your eye and mutters something about imbalanced humors. You've heard that phrase before. Time for your mainstream medieval fact. The dominant medical theory throughout the Middle Ages was the humorism model inherited from ancient Greek and Roman physicians. According to this belief, the human body was governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and health meant keeping them in perfect balance. Too much of one sickness, too little of another, also sickness. There was no winning. According to Editha, your bile is clearly rising. She nods sagely, as if the plum swelling on your face confirms everything. So the treatment begins. She mixes a poultice of crushed herbs, some vinegar, and wait, is that moss? Yep, definitely moss. She presses the damp green wad to your eye and tells you to breathe deeply. You breathe deeply. You regret it. It smells like swamp and regret. Then comes the chant. Is it Latin? A dialect improvised humming. Historians still argue whether these spoken incantations were based on genuine folk belief or just added for flair. Either way, you lie still and try not to sneeze. You ask if this will help. She responds, probably. You do not find this comforting. Later, Editha recommends bloodletting, but your mother draws the line. We're not poking holes in the child. It's just a swollen eye. Editha seems slightly disappointed she'd already rolled out her leech jar. Yes, leeches. Here's your weird tidbit. Leech therapy was a staple of medieval medicine. Thought to help remove excess blood, leeches were applied to just about everything: fevers, headaches, indigestion, marital problems. Okay, maybe not the last one, or maybe especially that one. Instead, you're told to rest, drink cleansing teas, and not look at the sun for a while. Which sounds easy, except for the fact that your house has no curtains, and the roof leaks just enough to create strategic sunbeams directly onto your face. You lie there, one eye squinting, trying not to think about how every part of your body itches, hurts, or feels suspiciously damp. There are no painkillers, no antibiotics, no guarantee that you're not slowly going blind. But you do your best to trust Editha's moss magic and hum therapy. By afternoon, the swelling hasn't worsened, which your family calls a victory. Your sister keeps offering to poke it and see what happens, which is either sibling curiosity or medieval science at its purest. You think about what would happen if things got worse. There's no hospital. The nearest monastic infirmary is a day's travel away, and they're mostly full of monks, not medicine. If the eye got infected, you'd risk losing it. Or worse, because here's the truth. They don't write in the fairy tales in the Middle Ages. Even small injuries could spiral into catastrophe. A cut could fester. A toothache could spread infection to your bloodstream. A stubbed toe could lead to gangrene. And medicine, while often well-intentioned, wasn't exactly sterile. Historians still argue whether medieval medical practitioners did more harm than good overall. But one thing's clear, a lot of healing was just your body doing the hard work, while the humans waved herbs and prayers over it. You fall into a restless nap and dream of leeches performing a folk dance on your eyelid. When you wake, your vision is blurry, but the pain is easing. The swelling has stopped growing. You feel cautiously hopeful. Editha returns one last time to press another poultice to your face and mutter something about moon cycles. She leaves behind a bundle of dried plants and a warning, don't eat the blue ones. You don't ask which ones those are. Dinner that night is soft bread soaked in broth. Easier to chew when your face feels tender. The broth is thin but warm, and for once, no one mentions turnips. Your sister draws a picture in the dirt of you with one giant eye and tiny limbs. You're flattered and mildly insulted. As you lie in bed that night, you realize just how fragile life is in this world. There's no safety net, no pharmacist, just your immune system, and whoever happens to be the village's best guess at healing. Still, you survive the day, eye intact, marginally, and tomorrow is church day. Time to get real familiar with Latin. You don't understand incense that makes you sneeze, and the intense awkwardness of confessing sins you don't remember committing. The church bells start tolling before the sun is even up. You groan. Everything still hurts, including your face, but there's no skipping church. Not unless you're deathly ill or already dead. And even then, someone might prop you up in the back pew just in case your soul needs one last push towards salvation. You shuffle out of bed and fumble into your one acceptable church tunic. It's scratchy, too big, and smells vaguely of mildew. But it's the cleanest thing you own, which is saying almost nothing. Outside, the village is already stirring. The air carries the chill of damp earth and wood smoke, and the path to the church is a muddy mess from last night's drizzle. You slip twice. Your goat Marjorie watches and judges. She is, as always, unimpressed. The church itself is the largest building for miles. Not large by any modern standard, but imposing enough thick stone walls, narrow stained glass windows, and a heavy wooden door that creaks open like something from a horror film. And inside, darkness, incense, and silence. You step into the cool gloom, instantly swallowed by shadows and the murmurs of early arrivals. Now for your mainstream fact, in medieval Europe, the church wasn't just a religious center, it was the heart of the community. It controlled not only spiritual life, but often education, social order, and local politics. Most peasants couldn't read or write, but they could recognize saints in murals and follow rituals drilled into them since childhood. You slide onto a worn wooden bench that's seen centuries of uncomfortable bottoms and begin your favorite medieval church pastime trying to stay awake. Stay. The priest enters in full robes, his voice echoing through the nave. The Mass is entirely in Latin, because of course it is, and you understand absolutely none of it. You know when to kneel, when to cross yourself, and when to mumble along. But the words, total mystery. This is not a bug, it's a feature. One of the long-running scholarly debates around medieval worship is just how much the average person truly understood about their own religion. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers felt spiritually fulfilled or just spiritually confused during Mass. Was it about connection, fear habit, or all three steeped in mystery and a dash of incense? Today it mostly feels long. At one point, your nose itches, but you're too afraid to scratch it during the sacred bits. At another, you sneeze loudly. 3 old women glare at you like you just cursed the altar. Marjorie the goat, somehow now peering through the open door, looks impressed. After Mass comes confession. You queue up in front of a small wooden screen while the priest settles in to hear your sins. Problem is, you're not entirely sure what your sins are. Yesterday, you almost kicked a chicken. This morning, you thought about punching your sister. And there was that one time you ate bread before the fast ended. You kneel, mutter your meager confessions and await penance. He gives you 12 Hail Marys and instructs you to help clean the church steps later. A fair deal, considering you did actually kick that chicken if only lightly. Once everyone's finished, the priest begins announcements. Yes, medieval church had announcements and then shifts into his weekly sermon. Today's topic, hell. Again, he describes it in graphic detail. Lakes of fire-wailing souls, demons with pitchforks and eternal torment. You're 9, and you will not sleep for a week. Still, you have to admire the theatricality. It's like medieval horror storytelling with bonus spiritual consequences. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval church art often depicted terrifying scenes of hell, not as metaphor, but as genuine visual warnings. Church walls were painted with writhing demons, flaming pits, and damned souls being boiled, roasted, or prodded by devilfish hybrids. And the people loved it. It was spiritual and entertaining. You leave church more tired than when you arrived, and slightly traumatized by a particularly graphic mention of a demon chewing on greedy merchants. Outside, people linger. Church is also social hour. You listen to gossip about whose ox wandered off, whose daughter might be betrothed, and which field has mysteriously turned sour, probably curses. You nod when appropriate, try to avoid stepping in donkey droppings, and discreetly scratch your still swollen eye. The priest walks past nodding at everyone. You wonder what his life is like. Probably better than yours. He can read. He has wine. He sleeps indoors without a leaky roof. But also, he has to hear everyone's confessions and never gets to leave town. You get sent off to scrub the church steps with a straw brush and cold water. It's penance, but also kind of peaceful. The sun's finally up. The bells have gone quiet. You find a rhythm, until you see it, a small scrap of parchment wedged under a loose stone. You pick it up. There's writing Latin probably, but it's elegant. Inked carefully. Maybe a prayer. A letter. You show it to your mother later, but she just shrugs. Maybe the priest dropped it. Or maybe it's a spell. She says this with complete seriousness, because yes, spells were a thing. Another fun historical twist, though. The church officially condemned magic medieval people, often blended folk belief with religious practice. You might pray to a saint and wear a protective charm. You might attend Mass and leave offerings at a fairy mound. It was less either or and more cover all your bases. You stash the parchment under your bed, not because you believe in spells obviously, but also you kind of do. That night, your family says evening prayers by candlelight. You repeat the words you've known since forever, half asleep and fully exhausted. It's been a long day of Latin and fear-mongering and cold floor scrubbing. As you settle into your straw bed, you realize that here in medieval times, religion isn't just something you do on Sunday. It's everywhere. It tells you what to eat, when to marry, how to think, what to wear, where to stand, when to kneel, and even how long your sleeves should be. It's your calendar, your school, your law, and your bedtime story. And whether or not you understand it, it understands you, or so you're told. Your eye throbs once more. You whisper a half-formed prayer to whichever saint handles eyelids. And then you sleep, because tomorrow you're being sent to help with harvest. And there are far scarier things than Latin and incense waiting out there in the fields. You're jolted awake before sunrise again. But this time, it's not church bells. It's your uncle banging on the door with a stick and yelling something about turnips. That's your only warning before you're whisked out of bed stuffed with a chunk of rye bread and shoved toward the fields with a rusted hoe in hand. Today is harvest day, which sounds sort of festive until you realize it means 14 hours of back-breaking labor. No bathroom breaks, and maybe a hunk of cheese if you're lucky. The fields stretch wide mist curling across furrows of beets, barley, and vegetables you can't name, but are expected to haul. You trudge behind your uncle and older cousins, feet already wet from dew. The earth squishes under your shoes. One wrong step, and you're ankle deep in muck. Again, you arrive at the edge of the barley rows and sigh. Barley. Again, here's your mainstream historical fact. Most medieval peasants spent the bulk of their lives cultivating staple crops like barley, rye, and oats. Wheat was too expensive for the average serf, and vegetables were mostly for subsistence. Your diet would be a bleak carousel of pottage bread, and on rare celebratory days, maybe some dried peas or salted pork. Your job today is to help gather and bind. Sounds simple. It isn't. The sickles are dull. Your grip is weak. The sun creeps up with malicious slowness, baking the back of your neck until it blisters. There's no shade, no gloves, no sunscreen. Remember that because medieval people rubbed ashes, clay, or even animal fat on their skin to avoid burning. Historians still argue whether that helped or just made them extra crispy. By noon, your hands are raw and your shirt is clinging to you like a damn shroud. You pause for water, lukewarm and slightly metallic in taste, and for a moment you fantasize about air conditioning and cold Gatorade. Then your uncle smacks your shoulder and tells you to stop daydreaming. The barley won't bundle itself. The bundle cart is handled by a boy who's maybe 10, but already has the hardened scowl of a man who's seen things. He doesn't speak, just nods once and disappears behind rows with the wheelbarrow that squeaks like it's dying. You're not sure how he got so strong. Maybe the barley has secrets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval communities had field songs sung during harvest to keep rhythm and morale up. You try humming one, but your voice cracks, and your cousin throws a turnip at you. So that's that. By mid-afternoon, you're herded toward a small grove for a brief lunch. Everyone collapses onto grass, sharing whatever food they brought. You pull out your treasure, a crust of rye bread with a smear of goat cheese. Your cousin has a roasted onion. Your uncle chews on something unidentifiable and hard. Conversation is sparse. No one has energy. but you catch murmurs of someone's cow going dry, a merchant being robbed on the road and whispers that the Lord may increase taxes this season. Someone makes a joke about hiding in the barley and living like a rabbit. It's not a bad idea, honestly. The bell tied around Marjorie's neck jingles somewhere nearby. She's here nibbling weeds, entirely unbothered by your suffering. You think about trading places. Just as you start to doze off, a cry goes up. A neighbor has fainted, dehydrated probably. They pull him into the shade. Someone pours water on his head. No one panics. This happens all the time. He'll either wake up or he won't. Life moves on, and you get handed his sickle. The rest of the day blurs into pain and repetition. Bend, cut, gather, tie. Bend, cut, gather, tie. Your back screams. Your fingers start to blister. At one point you step on something squishy and decide not to look down. Somewhere between the 17th and 18th barley row you start to hallucinate that one of the scarecrows is moving. It's not, probably. You spot the reeve, the Lord's man, circling with a ledger in hand, counting bushels, jotting notes. He doesn't help, just watches, always watching. You wonder if he sleeps with that expression. You hope he steps on something squishy too. As the sun finally begins to dip behind the hills, your uncle calls time. You drop the sickle like it's cursed and flop onto your back in the dirt. The sky's gone pink. Birds chirp like they didn't just witness your suffering. Here comes your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants worked themselves to death, or if their labor rhythm allowed for more rest days than we assume. Some records suggest up to 80 to 100 holy days a year more than modern vacation policies. But many of those days involved forced church attendance, mandated fasting, or working in secret to avoid starvation. So, was it really rest? You'd settle for a single clean sock and a nap. The walk home is silent. Everyone limps. Your little cousin openly weeps. Marjorie the goat trots along like she's starring in a medieval shampoo ad. Back in the village, your mother greets you with a bowl of warm pottage and a nod that might be pride or pity. Hard to tell. You eat, slowly. Everything aches. Your father asks how it went. You say something between a groan and a shrug. He laughs. Good, he says. Tomorrow's flax. You consider fleeing the country. Except there is no country. There's only this village and the one 5 miles over. And you've heard rumors of wolves in between. You crawl into bed fully clothed, too tired to wash. Your fingernails are caked in dirt. Your calves twitch involuntarily. You mutter a quick prayer to whichever saint handles agriculture. Or possibly blisters. Then with straw in your hair and a beet in your pocket you forgot to give it back, you drift off. Tomorrow is flax. You have no idea what flax is, but you're sure you won't like it. The next morning, your muscles scream before you even move. Your back protests. Your arms feel like soggy porridge. And your palms, you could swear someone took a cheese grater to them overnight. But it doesn't matter, because today is flax. No one explains what that means. They just point toward a cart full of bundles and mutter retting pond. You don't ask questions. Asking questions yesterday got you a turnip to the face. You follow a group of villagers down a narrow path into a part of the forest you haven't seen before. The air is different here, damp, heavy and sharp, with the smell of something foul. That would be the retting pond. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Flax was one of the most important fibers of the medieval period. It was used to make linen a breathable fabric favored by monks, nobles, and peasants alike. But the process of turning flax plants into cloth, oh, it's a real joyride. And by joyride, we mean nightmare. Step 1. Soaking flax in stagnant water to rot away the inner stalk. This is called retting. Step 2, drying. Step 3, breaking and beating the stalks to get to the fibers. Step 4, combing with massive iron brushes called hackles that could double as medieval torture devices. And guess what you get to help with today? You're handed a bundle of flax and told to toss it into the pond. The water is brown and thick, covered in a floating green film. It bubbles ominously. Something beneath the surface moves. You'd rather not know what. You gag as the smell hits. Imagine wet hay mixed with swamp breath and something long dead. You look around. No one else flinches. They've grown immune or lost their sense of smell in 1296. The retting process takes days, but your job is to help haul out the bundles that were dumped earlier this week. You wade into the pond barefoot because of course you do, and immediately regret every life choice that brought you here. The mud sucks at your feet. Something brushes your ankle. You scream a little. A small child behind you laughs. You make a mental note to never trust that child. You heave a soaked bundle onto the shore, dripping and slimy. Then another, and another. The older men begin laying them out on flat stones in the sun. The fibers must dry before they can be broken apart. A woman with one tooth and zero sense of personal space instructs you on breaking. It involves slamming a wooden blade onto the stalks until they shatter and the useful fibers separate from the woody core. It's like making artisanal splinters. You try it. Your aim is terrible. The flax breaks in all the wrong places. She sighs, takes over, and does 3 bundles in the time it takes you to blink. Now comes the hackling. This apparently is your next assignment. A hackle looks like a bed of nails crossed with a bear trap. You're meant to comb the flax fibers through it slowly, carefully to straighten them. Instead, you jab your hand and bleed a little. Not enough for sympathy. Just enough for everyone to pretend not to notice. A quirky tidbit, in some villages, flax work was done in secret at night because the smell from retting was so bad it would start feuds with neighbors. Imagine being known not for your farming skills, but for your smelly swamp yarn. Medieval drama. Hackling is strangely hypnotic. Pull, comb, repeat. You get a rhythm going. For a moment it's peaceful. Until someone screams. You whip around. It's the child from earlier, elbow deep in the pond, yanking at something. An eel, maybe. Or a water snake. Or something worse. He's grinning. The adults ignore him. You begin plotting your escape from this timeline. The rest of the day is spent dragging, breaking, and hackling. Occasionally, someone tests the fibers by running them between their teeth. You decline to participate in that ritual. You learn that nothing here happens quickly. Flax takes weeks to prepare. By the time it's spun and woven into cloth, half the village has contributed and cursed about it. Historians still argue whether linen production was a communal duty or a semi-professionalized craft in many regions. Some records show peasants doing it for personal use, while others hint at entire family businesses focused solely on linen. Either way, it was exhausting. You, a modern soul, start fantasizing about synthetic fabric, about stretchy waistbands, about clothes that don't smell like marsh rot. Your reward for surviving Flax Day, a blister, and a hearty pat on the back that dislodges a cloud of pond stench from your tunic. You limp home dripping. Your mother peels off your shirt at the door and mutters something about idiot boys and cursed plants. She hands you a rag soaked in vinegar and tells you to scrub. You try. The smell is stubborn. You collapse onto your mat, hair, damp fingers, sore smelling like a compost pile. Somewhere outside, the child with the eel is still laughing. You consider the possibility that he's not a child at all. Perhaps he's a pond spirit sent to torment you. Marjorie the goat nuzzles your face. You push her away with the strength of a damp sponge. In the dark, your sister whispers tomorrow's tanning day. You groan, loudly. She grins and says, "You'll love it. It's cowskins and poop," and with that fragrant promise hanging in the air, you drift off into another restless medieval sleep. You wake up gagging, not from a dream, but from the very real smell of animal hide being scraped clean with fermented dog poop. You weren't hallucinating last night. Today is tanning day. Outside, the air hits you like a wet punch to the face. It's thick with ammonia and rot sharp enough to sting your eyes. Your sister wasn't kidding. Tanners use excrement, yes, actual feces, to soften leather hides. Welcome to one of the lowest and smelliest rungs on the medieval career ladder. You're not just surviving the Middle Ages, you're being humbled by them. The village tanner is a man named Oswin, whose face seems permanently locked in a frown, and whose hands are the exact color of beef jerky. He greets you with a grunt and tosses you a raw cowhide. It's heavier than you expected, cold and slick with leftover fat. You drop it. He grunts again. You're making a great first impression. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tanning in medieval Europe was essential for producing leather for shoes, belts, armor, book covers, even buckets. But tanners were social outcasts. Their work stank. Their homes were pushed to the farthest edge of the village, and no one invited them to dinner. You drag the hide over to a table and begin scraping. The tool is dull curved like a sad crescent moon, and barely does anything unless you really press. The leftover flesh and hair slowly peel away in greasy ribbons. You try not to breathe through your nose. It doesn't help. A few feet away, another boy about your age, but wearing a nose plug made of beeswax and linen, grins at you. Like this is the highlight of his week. First time he asks. You nod. He offers you a makeshift mask. You take it. It smells like chamomile. You mentally promote him to your list of favorite villagers. Now comes the worst part, the baiting stage. This is where the hides are soaked in a mixture of water, and you guessed it, dog dung. You ask where they get the supply. Collections, Oswin says simply. You pray he doesn't elaborate. He does. People leave it in a bucket at the edge of the village. I pick it up Thursdays. You try not to scream. The hides are sloshing in an open vat. You're invited to stir them with your bare hands. Your new chamomile-scented friend slaps on a pair of thin leather gloves. You are not offered a pair. You reach in, and the sensation is, how do we say this gently? Not what you'd want your hands to ever experience again. Warm, spongy, slightly gritty. You consider the irony modern people buy artisanal leather goods without realizing they were once massaged in poop by medieval teenagers. Sleep well tonight, Etsy shoppers. A quirky tidbit. Some towns actually had laws against tanners living too close to bakeries because their odor was so strong it was said to ruin the taste of bread. Imagine your croissants tasting like cowhide stew. Unforgivable. After hours of soaking, the hides are transferred to a lime solution to loosen remaining hair. You're handed a stiff, bristle brush and told to get scrubbing. The skin is slippery. You fall twice. Oswin chuckles for the first and only time. The entire day is a festival of bad smells, awkward slipping and stinging blisters. Your fingernails are caked with things you don't name. Every time you blink, You swear the air sticks to your eyelids, and yet the transformation is weirdly satisfying. Slowly, hide turns to leather. It becomes flexible, golden, and familiar. You run your fingers across it carefully now and feel a moment of awe. This was once part of a cow, then a heap of refuse. Now it might become a glove, a satchel, a book cover. That's kind of beautiful. Historians still argue whether medieval tanning was mostly done by guild-trained craftsmen or whether it remained a rural cottage industry. Evidence exists for both, especially as trade expanded. Leather workers were essential but rarely respected. They were the hands behind everyday survival, but they rarely made it into the songs or stories. You right now understand exactly why. You walk back home with arms outstretched, trying not to touch anything or anyone. Your sister meets you at the door and immediately slams it shut. You're told to wash in the river. Twice, you strip behind a tree and step into the icy water, scrubbing with handfuls of sand and nettles. Your skin turns pink. The smell, it lingers. That night, you lie stiff on your mat, your entire body humming from exertion. It takes effort to even blink. The world still smells faintly of cowhide and lime water. Even though you've rinsed yourself raw, Marjorie the goat gives you a wide berth. As you drift off, you wonder, was anything clean in this time? Was everything soaked, scraped, smoked, or pickled? You don't finish the thought. You're already asleep, dreaming of beeswax nose plugs and modern deodorant. You're jolted awake by something cold and metallic against your ribs. A spoon. Your sister grins down at you, holding a bowl of pale, watery gruel. Breakfast, she chirps. You groan. Your muscles ache from yesterday's tanner ordeal, and the smell in your nostrils still hasn't forgiven you. But the thin porridge is surprisingly warm, and your stomach doesn't care about flavor, it wants anything. You slurp it down with all the grace of a medieval piglet. Today, you're going to the market, or more accurately, you're being sent to the market to carry heavy things and keep your mouth shut. Your sister has a basket full of dried mushrooms, wilted cabbage, and a few desperate-looking turnips to trade. You tag along, clutching the basket like a medieval intern. The road to market is muddy and crowded. Chickens scatter, carts creak. A toddler shrieks. It smells like, well, it's a blend of manure sweat, overripe apples, and desperation. You're learning that the Middle Ages were mostly a symphony of terrible smells, with the occasional hurdy-gurdy. The town square bustles with traders hawking goods, onions tied in ropes, goose eggs, hand-woven baskets, live ferrets seriously, and something that might be cheese or a mistake. You stand beside your sister while she haggles with a fishmonger who has exactly 3 teeth and an eye patch. He offers dried herring that smells like a dare. She counters with a mushroom. It's brutal. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval markets were the beating hearts of local life. They were regulated by town charters, with specific market days and rules against price gouging or cheating on weights. There were even official weighers to keep things honest, mostly. You spot one now, a red-faced man with a tiny scale and a suspiciously smug expression. A woman screams at him about her short-weight flour. He shrugs. You wander a little too far and nearly trip over a juggler. Yes, an actual juggler standing atop an overturned barrel, tossing knives and plums. He winks at you and almost catches a blade with his face. Children cheer. Beside him, a man with a trained goose plays a hurdy-gurdy, while his bird bows for coins. You blink. You may be slightly dehydrated, but that's definitely happening. Your sister snatches your arm and hisses, "Don't get distracted." You apologize to the goose. She trades your basket of sad vegetables for half a wheel of crumbly cheese, a new spindle of thread, and blessedly, a small linen pouch of salt. That's worth more than you'd guessed. Salt preserves everything from meat to fish to probably family reputations. A quirky tidbit, in some towns you could rent a goat for an hour. Just enough time to walk it through the square to show off your wealth before sneaking it back. Medieval flexing was real. As you pass a row of sellers shouting about their miracle ointments, one man tries to convince you that his beetroot paste cures coughing, sneezing, boils, and heartbreak. You're tempted mostly because his voice is so earnest, but your sister pulls you away before you can ask for a sample. Nearby, a cloth merchant arranges bolts of rough wool dyed in murky reds and sickly yellows. You touch one and immediately regret it. Scratchy, like hugging a hedgehog in a sandstorm. You notice something odd, a group of monks quietly arguing over a book. Yes, a book. One holds it like a sacred artifact, and the others point to the binding debating something you can't hear. Historians still argue your sister whispers whether monks copied texts mainly for religious use, or if they also ran small commercial scriptoria on the side. You blink at her. She shrugs. I eavesdrop a lot. You realize standing there amid this swirl of trade songs shouting livestock and faint pickpocketing that medieval marketplaces were not just for goods. They were for gossip, politics, romance street performances, shady deals, and the occasional accidental goat theft. It's chaos, but a very human chaos. You spot a group of kids playing a game with a pig bladder balloon, bouncing it in the air while trying not to fall in a puddle. One kid slips. Everyone cheers. You almost join them, but your sister is already marching toward the far edge of the square. Here, in a shaded nook, sits the village tooth drawer. You freeze. A tooth drawer is exactly what it sounds like. A man whose entire profession is pulling teeth. He has no gloves, no anesthetic, and the hygiene of a compost bin. But his smile is wide, his tools are polished, and business is good. A line of villagers, young and old, stand nervously clutching their jaws. One woman mutters a prayer. A boy clutches a chicken for comfort. The tooth drawer waves you forward. You clutch your mouth protectively. We're just looking, you yelp, stepping back. Your sister smirks and hands the man a dried mushroom for later. He grins and pockets it. You make it home just as the sun begins to dip, your arms sore from carrying the cheese and your mind spinning from the experience. Your sister unpacks the goods with surprising efficiency. You flop onto your straw mat exhausted, and then she says the 5 words that make your stomach flip. Tomorrow we're visiting the manor. You sit up. The Lord's manor, you croak. She nods. You gulp. What could possibly go wrong? You wake up with a crust of yesterday's cheese still on your chin. Your sister is already up brushing her hair and trying to make your tunic look less like something a scarecrow rejected. Today you're going to the manor. You've seen it only from a distance. A hulking structure of timber and stone perched just beyond the fields. Its pointed gables like angry eyebrows over a perpetual frown. It belongs to the local lord, a man with 5 horses, 12 tapestries, and probably 14 grudges. You're not going there for fun. Your sister has a delivery to make thread and cheese a token of your household's loyalty. That's how it works in this feudal shuffle. Everyone owes something to someone slightly less dirty, but far more terrifying. You walk the path with cautious steps. Birds chirp. A distant cow groans. The manor looms larger with every step. It's not a castle exactly, but but it's impressive enough that you instinctively try to suck in your gut. The gate creaks open. Inside the courtyard bustles. Servants scrub benches. Stable boys shovel hay and less savoury substances. A pig darts past you squealing with unearned joy. Someone yells at you to move. You do instinctively bowing even though you're not entirely sure to whom. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Most manorial estates weren't massive fortresses. They were self-sustaining centres of rural administration. The lord didn't just rule with a sword. He collected rents, presided over disputes, and managed harvest quotas. Picture a CEO with a grudge and a crossbow. You're ushered into a wide hall that smells of old smoke, damp fur, and expectations. The wooden beams above are dark with soot. Dogs lounge near the fire, clearly enjoying more comfort than you've had in a week. Tapestries depicting what you assume are glorious battles hang crookedly on the walls. One shows a knight triumphing over a dragon that looks suspiciously like a giant worm. The steward appears an older man with the posture of someone who's been disappointed since birth. He raises an eyebrow at your bundle of offerings. Your sister offers it with a respectful curtsy. "And this is your," he asks, eyeing you. "Apprentice," she says quickly. You try to smile. It comes out as a twitch. You're ordered to wait. You wait and wait. Then a side door creaks open and you're called forward. Your sister goes with you, thank heavens, or you might have bolted through the nearest window. The lord sits on a carved chair too grand to be called a chair. He wears a fur-lined cloak despite the moderate temperature and examines a parchment with the scrutiny of someone trying to catch it lying. His face is sharp, his fingers are ringed, and his expression says, "I once watched a man executed for less than bad posture." You bow. Deeply. You nearly fall over. He doesn't look up. Your sister speaks calmly. She thanks him for his continued protection, mentions the thread and cheese and compliments his stewardship of the local fields. He grunts, possibly in approval, possibly because something in his neck cracked. Then he looks at you. "What skills do you have?" Your mouth opens. Absolutely nothing useful falls out. You stammer something about helping with the tanner, the market, possibly herding goats. You can't remember if you actually herded the goat or just ran away from it. He eyes you like a blacksmith assessing a bent nail. "Send them to the reeve," he mutters. You're escorted back out to the courtyard, your sister trailing behind with a shrug that says, "Could have gone worse." The reeve is the lord's land manager, a man responsible for making sure the peasants plant harvest and pay their dues. He's lean with the sun-damaged face of someone who never skips a tax. He looks you up and down. "Field work," he says. "But tomorrow, wear something worse." You didn't think that was possible. Still you nod. Your sister pulls you aside. "It's not so bad. Some kids end up mucking the pig stalls or chasing debtors." You blink. That was meant to comfort you. It doesn't. As you leave the manor grounds, you pass by a group of pages practicing swordplay. It looks glamorous until one whacks another in the shin, and he topples into a mud puddle. The instructor sighs, like this happens hourly. You step aside just in time to avoid a flying wooden sword. A fringed tidbit, sometimes young noble boys were sent to other noble houses as hostages to ensure peace between families. They'd be raised there often kindly, but always under the subtle threat of "don't make us regret keeping you alive." Back home you collapse onto your mat. Your sister gives you a piece of the cheese she didn't trade away. "Think you'll survive field work?" she asks. "Do I get a pitchfork?" "No." "Then, no." She laughs. The fire flickers low. Outside you hear an owl hoot and something large crash through the underbrush. Probably the goat again. You lie awake staring at the thatch roof, trying to picture your future. Digging holes, dragging sacks, sweating in places you didn't know had sweat glands. But also, breathing air that isn't tanner-scented, working among other peasants who might just maybe be as confused as you are. You drift off. You dream of becoming the lord of your own manor someday, with your own cheese, your own goat, and absolutely no reeve. Spoiler, that's not happening. But hey, a medieval kid can dream. Your first day under the reeve begins before sunrise, because medieval peasants don't sleep in even when they've barely slept at all. You're handed a hoe and sent to the fields, where a fog clings to the earth like a jealous ghost. Your breath comes out in clouds. Dew soaks your ankles. Your back already aches, and you haven't even started working yet. The reeve assigns you a row of turnips. You nod like you know what that means. You do not, but you quickly figure it out. Pull the weeds loose in the soil. Don't trample the crops. Repeat until you've forgotten what joy feels like. Next to you, an older woman works methodically, humming a tune that sounds like it predates fire. She's missing 2 teeth and 1 eyebrow, but has the patience of a saint. She corrects your grip, your stance, and eventually your entire worldview. This ain't so bad, she mutters half to herself. Less it rains, or hails, or you get boils. Comforting. You notice how everyone in the field moves like they were born holding tools. Kids barely older than you gather stones. Grandparents plod down rows leaning on sticks. Even the dog guarding the lunch basket seems more competent than you. Here's your mainstream fact: around 85 to 90% of people in medieval Europe lived in rural areas and worked in agriculture. The rhythm of the year wasn't dictated by holidays, it was ruled by sowing and harvest. Every season had a job, and every job could break your back. But today isn't about the grand cycle of seasons. It's about surviving this row of turnips. Your stomach growls. Someone passes a wooden flask of ale, yes ale, at sunrise. You take a sip and immediately cough. It's weak. Barely fermented, but it still burns like disappointment. By midday, you've sweated through your second tunic. Your legs feel like pudding. The sun has emerged cruel and smug, and your neck is pinking in protest. You ask for a break. The reeve smirks. When you die, apparently that was a joke. Probably. You collapse near a hedgerow and nibble a hunk of coarse bread. It tastes like dust and effort. Someone shares a soft onion. You've never been so grateful for tears that aren't emotional. You overhear the others talking about who's going to marry whom, who owes the reeve extra grain, who may or may not be harboring a chicken that doesn't technically belong to them. One boy tells a story about a man who grew a cabbage the size of a pig. The others nod solemnly. You aren't sure whether they believe it, or just want to believe in a better cabbage. Then comes a murmur of tension. Someone mentions the taxes. Turns out the Lord's representative is coming in 2 days to collect grain wool and whatever else he feels entitled to. And no one feels ready. A woman curses under her breath. A man mutters about bad years and worse harvests. And then someone says, maybe we should talk to the priest. Because yes, the village priest isn't just a spiritual leader. He's also a local mediator, record keeper, and sometimes the only person who can read Latin. His word can sway the reeve, occasionally, very occasionally. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some medieval peasants actually used crop protection spells, chants and rituals performed in fields to protect against poor harvests or bad weather. Historians still debate whether these rituals were pagan holdovers or just the result of desperation meeting creativity. You're assigned a new task after lunch hauling dung. It's exactly what it sounds like. Cart after cart of manure. needs to be distributed to the far end of the field where new barley will be planted. The smell is a character of its own, bold, aggressive, and weirdly clingy. You smell it in your nose, in your mouth, in your dreams. You try breathing through your mouth. Bad idea. Still, you power through. The thought of going home without collapsing gives you a strange burst of pride. By evening, the reeve claps you on the back hard enough to dislodge a memory. Didn't quit, he grunts. Could have. Is that praise? You think it might be. You've never been more confused and honored by a grunt in your life. You walk home slower than you've ever moved, like every joint has filed a complaint. Your sister laughs when she sees you. She hands you a bowl of pottage, basically porridge with hopes of flavor, and you gulp it down like it's a royal feast. She asks how it went. You tell her you think your spine left your body sometime after lunch. She nods. You'll get used to it. Do I want to? She shrugs. Doesn't matter. You sleep like someone dropped a rock on your head. No dreams, no midnight goat chase. Just sweet, undisturbed blackness. The next morning, you do it again, and again, and again. You begin to learn the rhythm. You start to recognize weeds. You time your brakes by the sun's position. You don't flinch when a beetle crawls up your leg. You almost stop gagging at the manure. This doesn't mean you're good at it, but you're surviving it. And in medieval times, that's kind of the same thing. You wake up to coughing, not yours, but your little sister's. Harsh, rasping like someone trying to breathe through a burlap sack. She huddles under the wool blanket, eyes watery, cheeks flushed. And just like that, you're reminded in medieval times getting sick isn't a detour. It's a whole different kind of danger. Your mother brews a foul-smelling concoction from garlic leeks and something she calls blessed water. You'd call it swamp soup, but it's all you've got. No pharmacies, no urgent care. Just superstition, hope, and herbs that may or may not do anything besides stink up the house. Sickness is everywhere. You hear it in the coughing neighbors. You see it in the red welts on a boy's arms. You feel it in the way people avoid touching each other too long. Even the chickens seem nervous. Your sister's illness isn't rare. It's a common cold, or possibly the start of something worse. You don't know. No one does. Diagnosing in the Middle Ages is 70% guesswork, 20% prayer, and 10% whatever the local healer thinks mercury can fix. Here's your mainstream fact: the leading causes of death in medieval Europe weren't war or wild animals. They were disease and infection. Smallpox, dysentery, tuberculosis, and especially pneumonia ran rampant. A minor cut could turn fatal. A cough could spread through the whole village in a week, but you still have to go to the fields. The reeve doesn't accept sick sister as a day off. You leave behind a pot of warm herbal tea and an apologetic glance, mid-ploughing. You hear the whispers someone else is sick too. This time it's old Garth, who hasn't left his bed in 3 days. People start murmuring about the miasma bad air. Someone ties a posy of herbs to their neck. Someone else sprinkles salt at their door. And yes, in case you're wondering, miasma theory is the dominant belief. People think bad smells cause disease. It's not completely wrong. Bad smells often come from bad hygiene, which does correlate with illness. But no one knows about germs. Not yet. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some villages, people believed illness could be scared off by loud noises. Bells would be rung, pots banged, and on occasion, masked plague doctors would stomp around looking more like a cursed bird than a comfort. You overhear a woman praying into a loaf of bread. She plans to feed it to her ailing husband, believing the prayer will pass into his body. He's not convinced, but he's also not arguing. Bread is bread. Later, you help the village healer gather herbs, nettle, sage, yarrow. She talks to the plants like old friends. She points out the good roots, the bad stems, and the deadly leaves that look friendly but are frankly murderous. You ask if she can help your sister. Maybe she says, if the wind's in the right mood. That's not reassuring, but it's the best offer on the table. Historians still argue whether the herbalists of the time were true practitioners of medical science or simply local lawkeepers operating on trial and error. But many of them had deep knowledge of plants passed down through generations, often more helpful than the treatments offered by university-trained physicians, who might just suggest leeches. Yes, leeches. You see your first bloodletting a few days later. A man in the next village has bad blood apparently. The local barber, who also pulls teeth and trims beards, ties a leather strap around the man's arm, nicks his vein, and collects the blood in a bowl like it's soup of the day. You watch from a distance, horrified and weirdly curious. The man faints. The barber calls it a success. You walk home that night with a new fear your insides. If something's wrong with them, there's almost nothing you can do. That evening, your sister's fever breaks. She's sweaty and pale, but she eats a few spoonfuls of porridge and sits upright. Your mother weeps softly into her apron. You pretend not to notice. Life in the village trudges on. You begin to understand how people live with so much uncertainty. They compartmentalize. Death isn't distant, it's part of the daily rhythm. You grieve quickly and move forward. Because if you stop too long, the world doesn't wait for you to catch up. You visit the church to give thanks. The priest performs a short mass, his Latin thick and slippery. You kneel beside the others, the scent of beeswax and damp wood filling your nostrils. After the service, you ask him about sin and sickness. He explains that disease is often seen as punishment or a test. The body suffers, he says, so the soul can shine. You don't know whether to feel comforted or insulted on your sister's behalf. Before you leave, he presses a small wooden token into your hand, a cross carved with shaking hands. For her pillow, he says, so she's guarded. You thank him. It doesn't matter whether you believe in its power. What matters is that it feels like something. You return home as the sun sets its light soft and pink like a whisper. Your sister is asleep, the token under her cheek, and for the first time in days she looks peaceful. You sit beside her, holding a cup of cold water, and staring into the middle distance where fireflies bob over the fields like flickering stars. For now the storm has passed, but you're starting to understand in medieval times even a good day is just a short pause between disasters. You're jolted awake by shouting. Not the frantic screams of an emergency, but that rough, all too familiar bark of someone trying to sell you something at sunrise. Knives repaired while you wait, scissors sharpened, pans mended. You peek out the window and yep, there's the tinker's cart. It's market day, and whether you like crowds or not, you're going. Because in the Middle Ages, the local market isn't just where you buy and sell, it's your one glimpse into the wider world. The gossip, the noise, the smells. It's all as alive as it is utterly chaotic. You sling a pouch over your shoulder filled with eggs, a handful of onions, and one small wheel of cheese. It's not much, but maybe you'll trade up. Maybe you'll get lucky. You cross into the village square, and it hits you the sensory overload. There's dried fish from a coastal peddler 2 days away. Cloth dyed a vivid blue woad, you overhear someone say, though it smells like swamp. There are geese honking angrily in a basket, and a man juggling what appear to be live frogs. You dodge a pig running loose and almost trip over a toddler trying to barter a snail shell. Classic. Here's your mainstream fact in medieval Europe. Weekly or monthly markets were essential to the rural economy. They weren't just about selling excess goods. They were often the only place to access what you couldn't make yourself. Salt, iron, tools, rare spices, books if you were rich, or exotic fabrics, all flowed through these bustling pop-up economies. You trade your eggs for a jar of honey, the onions for a better knife, and the cheese. A risky gamble. You hand it to a traveling entertainer in exchange for a carved wooden flute. You don't know how to play, but it feels hopeful. And then the performers take the stage well, more like a barrel than a crate. A troupe of players in tattered costumes reenacts a garbled version of the story of St. George and the Dragon. The dragon is clearly two kids under a green sheet, one of whom keeps tripping. But still people cheer. Laughter here is currency. So is distraction. Near the ale stall, a heavily bearded man tells a wide-eyed audience about his voyage to the Holy Land. Saw camels taller than barns, he claims, and a fish with human teeth. You're skeptical, but entertained. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval markets often doubled as early news outlets. Without printing presses or widespread literacy, merchants and travelers were how information moved. You learned who'd died, who'd married, who'd been arrested, or which lord had fallen from grace, all from whispers in the crowd. Basically, it's Twitter, but louder and smellier. You pass a woman selling potions in tiny vials. She promises they'll cure toothaches, attract lovers, or keep rats away depending on which label is legible. You consider asking if one will make your flute sound better, but think better of it. Down one alley, a man is yelling about relics. One of St. Bartholomew's actual fingernails, he insists. He even shows a grimy shard of something inside a tiny golden tube. Certified by 3 bishops, he claims. And it glows during thunderstorms. You're about to walk away when you catch another argument brewing near the fish stall. 2 men shout over the price of herring. One claims it's half rotted. The seller insists it's just fermented. That one word sets off a light bulb in your head. Your sister likes fermented things. You buy a small jar and tuck it into your bag. Gift secured. Historians still argue whether medieval fairs and markets were true democratic spaces or heavily controlled extensions of local feudal power. In some towns, anyone could sell peasants, craftsmen, traveling merchants. In others, the local lord charged heavy tolls or even monopolized certain goods. So your experience depends entirely on where you are and who runs the place. You notice a small group whispering near a tent draped in red. Gambling. Illegal in theory, ignored in practice. Dice cards, even beetle races. You watch as someone loses 2 chickens and a pair of boots in 5 minutes flat. You keep your distance. As the sun arcs higher, things grow rowdier. A fight breaks out over a stolen loaf. A man drinks too much mead and starts loudly reciting poetry to a confused goat. Another decides he can outsing the minstrel and begins yodeling badly until he's gently escorted out by a woman twice his size. You buy a strip of dried pear from a kind-looking old woman. She tells you it's from her own tree. You nod and thank her, and she smiles so widely you momentarily forget the toothlessness. It's a small reminder, not everything here is about survival. Sometimes it's just about connecting even briefly. Eventually, you return home with your mismatched loot. A knife, a jar of honey, fermented herring, a flute, and a full day's worth of stories. Your sister is feeling better. You hand her the flute and she squeaks out something resembling a song. You pretend it's beautiful. She pretends to believe you. Later, you sit by the hearth, feet sore, head spinning. The day may have felt like chaos, but it was also a window. You saw fabrics from Italy, pottery from Spain, rumors from France, and arguments in 5 different dialects. The world is so much bigger than your field, and once a week you get to taste a little bit of it. You close your eyes to the distant sound of the tinker leaving town, his cart clattering down the dirt path, singing something half slurred and probably obscene. Sleep comes easy tonight. You wake to the smell of damp earth and smoke. But there's something else, something acrid metallic. You blink, sit up, and realize a fire broke out nearby in the night. You're lucky. It didn't reach your home, but your neighbor's thatched roof is blackened and collapsed, the plume of ash curling up into the morning sky. This is the price of wood straw and open flames. You grab your cloak and rush out, helping form a line from the well. Wooden buckets pass hand-to-hand, steam rising off smouldering beams. There are no fire brigades, no alarms, just neighbors' panic and the occasional prayer to St. Florian. It's a harsh reminder that danger in the Middle Ages isn't always swords and sickness. It's your entire life reduced to ash while you sleep. Later, once the flames are out and the family is taken in by others, you're reminded of something practical. You're behind on your dues. The Lord Steward will be around soon, and you'd better be ready. Time to talk taxes. Here's your mainstream fact under the feudal system. Most peasants owed a mix of labor goods and sometimes money to the local lord. This might be a share of your grain, a portion of your wool, or several days of forced labor on his land called corvée. You don't get to negotiate, you just show up. Today you head to the manor's granary, your small sack of barley hoisted on one shoulder. A clerk, quill in one hand, suspicious squint in the other, weighs your offering and frowns. Light, he mutters. You want to argue, but the man standing behind him has a cudgel, so you say nothing. You shrug, nod, and walk away lighter in every sense. As you trudge home, you think about fairness. It feels like a myth. The Lord lives in a stone manor with glazed windows. You sleep beside chickens. You harvest both his field and your own. And if you protest best case scenario, you're ignored. Worst case, you're fined, whipped, or thrown into the stocks, humiliation and splinters included. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, peasants owed taxes in completely bizarre forms. In parts of England, tenants had to provide eels, yes, slippery, wriggling eels as payment. Thousands of them. There's an actual 12th century record of a man paying his rent with 4,000 eels. You're not sure what's worse, catching that many or counting them out. Back home, your sister's trying to fix a broken loom with twine and a chicken feather. You sit beside her, lending a hand. Together, you talk about making more cloth to sell at the next market, or maybe trading it to the priest for candles. But there's a bigger pressure looming: tithes. The church takes 1/10 of everything. Grain, fruit, wool, coins, even eggs. That new priest is friendlier than the last one, but he still expects his due. He explains kindly that your sacrifices please God. You wonder whether God ever comes down to count his portion personally. Historians still argue whether the tithe system was a form of religious devotion or just another economic burden disguised in holy language. For many, it was both. A path to heaven maybe, but also undeniably attack. Sometimes the system squeezes hard, and sometimes it downright chokes. A fellow villager was fined last week for baking bread in her own oven instead of the communal one. The Lord controls that oven. It's all about control. Water mills, wine presses, forests, salt roads, all taxed or owned by the Lord. You want to gather firewood? Better hope it's not from the wrong tree. There's a word for this: banalities. Not banal as in boring, but banal from the old French ban meaning the Lord's decree. You dream sometimes of freedom, owning land outright, no tithes, no dues, no lords with manicured fingernails and a nose that wrinkles when you speak. Some people do escape, freemen, or they run to cities, buy their way out, join a guild, disappear into the noise. But you're still here. Feet, muddy hands, calloused pockets empty. Still, you're not without cunning. That neighbor whose roof burned, the one whose goats keep chewing on your fence, you remember he still owes a tithe of barley. You gently suggest to the priest that he might be late. Later, you trade a skein of wool to the steward's assistant for an extra week to gather your own tithe. It's not noble, but it buys you time. Taxes aren't just about grain and silver. They're about negotiation, quiet debts, favors owed. Sometimes even gossip is a form of currency. You learn who's planning a secret wedding, who's hiding a second cow, who owes 3 hens but only has 2. You never use this knowledge cruelly, but you keep it tucked away because in the Middle Ages, survival isn't about brute strength. It's about subtlety. You patch up your roof in the evening just in case your thatch is next. The sun bleeds into the horizon orange and pink across smoke-streaked clouds. Your sister hums the flute clumsily adding squeaks. It's a strangely beautiful soundtrack, and for a moment in the last golden light, you think maybe it's not all broken. Maybe you're not just surviving. Maybe you're learning to play the game. The morning fog rolls in thick and low, wrapping around the village like a damp woolen blanket. You tug your cloak tighter and squint toward the distant bell tower, the only thing tall enough to pierce the mist. Today, the entire village is headed to the fields just beyond the river. Not for planting, not for harvesting. For war, no, you're not a soldier. But neither is the man beside you or the teenager behind you. And yet the Lord has called upon his levy. Every able-bodied peasant must show up with whatever they can, pitchforks, clubs, even the odd kitchen knife. You're not being asked, you're being summoned. This isn't your war, but you're expected to bleed in it. The cause, a land dispute between your lord and the next. Something about an inheritance or a dowry gone wrong. Historians still argue whether most of these minor medieval wars were driven by legal feuds or just bruised pride wrapped in parchment. Whatever the reason, you now stand in a muddy field among dozens of fellow villagers, squinting at a grizzled man who once fought in a real battle. He barks instructions and tells you to aim low, stab, not swing. You nod, but your grip is awkward, your arms too soft from farming, not fighting. The truth is you're cannon fodder, except cannons haven't even arrived yet. Here's your mainstream fact in the feudal system. Peasants could be conscripted for military service during local conflicts. Lords were required to provide troops to their higher nobles, or even the king, and that obligation often trickled down to you like muddy water through a cracked roof. You march all day, no proper boots, no real training. You think about your goats, about whether your sister remembered to cover the grain sacks in case of rain. You worry more about that than about dying. That's how twisted the priorities get. The next morning, you arrive at the site of the skirmish. Your opponents are just like you, sunburned, scared, and poorly armed. You stare at them across a field. Someone sneezes. It's awkward, almost farcical. Then the shouting begins. You run. Not heroically, just forward. You're shoved, tripped, and nearly trampled. Your club connects with someone's side not out of bravery but panic. You duck a wild swing and fall hard. Your lip splits open on a rock, and then it's over. Or at least over enough for both sides to stagger back, panting and bruised. No one really won. No banners were taken. No glorious songs will be sung about this muddy mess. You limp back to camp. No tents. Just damp ground and a fire that won't catch. But at least you're alive. The next day you're told your service is complete. For now, you trudge home with a limp and a sore shoulder past charred trees and forgotten helmets. And when you finally see your village again, your crooked fence, your lopsided door, it feels like a palace. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some lords rewarded returning levies with ale or bread. But one infamous baron in Burgundy gave his men onions. Just onions. Raw. He claimed they healed the blood. You're not sure what's worse, being nearly killed for someone else's quarrel or being paid in vegetables. You collapse on your straw mattress and sleep for a day. When you wake, your sister clucks her tongue at your bruises, then hands you a cup of watered wine and half a boiled turnip. Luxury. The rhythm of life returns slowly. The goats need milking. The thatch needs patching again. And the gossip has grown while you were gone. Someone claims to have seen the Virgin Mary in a puddle. And there's word that the king himself is visiting a town only 3 days' ride away. You're unimpressed. The king has never stepped foot in your village and likely never will. Still, for all its chaos, your brush with war gives you an odd sort of credibility. People listen when you speak, at least for a week. And though you'd never admit it, you learn something out there. Not about fighting, about fragility, and about luck. A different swing, a different stumble, and your bones might be in that field now feeding the crows. Historians still argue whether these forced levies were effective or merely a feudal formality. Some claim they were symbolic, showing the Lord's power more than achieving actual victory. Others argue they were necessary, a grim means of defense in a world where standing armies were rare and expensive. You don't care about the debates. You care that your foot still hurts, your ribs still ache, and your neighbor won't stop retelling how he held off 3 men at once, though everyone saw him cry behind a tree. By week's end, you're back to gathering firewood now, with a new appreciation for uneventful days. Because in medieval times, peace isn't the absence of war. It's just the space between the next disaster. You wake to a strange silence. No rooster, no fire crackling, no neighbor shouting at his ox. Just an eerie stillness, as if the village is holding its breath. You sit up on your straw mattress and immediately notice the smell, sharp, sour, metallic. Your stomach knots. Outside, the air carries it stronger. And then you see her, the baker's wife, sitting in the dirt, rocking back and forth, whispering something you can't hear. Her apron is stained with something dark. You walk past her, and you find the pig boy slumped by the well-skinned blotched lips blue. Dead. You've seen death before, sick livestock accidents with blades, even a crushed man last year during the church roof repairs. But this feels different, quieter, more deliberate. Someone murmurs a word behind you. Plague. Not a whisper, not a scream. Just the word. Soft, resigned. And just like that, the world shifts. Welcome to the next trial. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because now death doesn't come with sword and shield. It comes on fleas, rats and breath. And it doesn't knock. Here's your mainstream fact. The Black Death. The bubonic plague struck Europe in waves, most famously in the mid-14th century, killing anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of the population in just a few short years. And it didn't just take the old or weak. It took everyone. The symptoms are fast and vicious. Fever. Bubo-swollen lymph nodes often black and painful. Vomiting. Then death. Sometimes in a day. Sometimes you suffer for 2 or 3. There's no cure. There's not even understanding. Most blame bad air. Some say it's punishment for sin. Others, more dangerously, blame outsiders. Jews, lepers, witches. Anyone who's easy to scapegoat. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in the miasma theory, that bad air carried illness, or whether that was a convenient explanation when deeper knowledge was inaccessible. Either way, people flee the cities carrying disease with them, and your village, remote as it is, wasn't spared. The priest tries to calm everyone. He reads from Psalms. He sprinkles holy water over the sick. He tells people to confess. But then he coughs. He dies a week later. Panic replaces routine. No one goes to market. The blacksmith stops working. The church bell tolls again and again, not for mass, but for bodies. You're told not to touch the dead. But how do you leave your neighbor rotting in his doorway? Eventually you help dig a pit outside the village. No ceremony, just a mass grave. Quirky tidbit, in some villages, people stuffed flowers in their noses to ward off the stench and illness. That nursery rhyme, ring around the rosy a pocket full of posies. That's where it came from, at least, so the legend goes. Scholars still argue if it truly originated with the plague, or if we retrofitted the meaning later. Either way, you stuff lavender in your tunic and say a quiet prayer. The town healer, an old woman with knowledge of herbs and poultices, is overwhelmed. She works until she collapses, then gets back up. You bring her water. She blesses you. Her hands shake. Soon she too falls ill. Every day fewer faces. The boy who fetched water, gone. The woman who sang while baking, gone. Even the drunk who lived behind the mill is gone, and no one even knew he was sick. Eventually your sister begins to cough. It's just a tickle at first. Then the fever. Then the swelling under her arms. You sit beside her. You hold her hand. You sing. She doesn't make it. You bury her yourself. You don't cry until the sun sets and the village is quiet again. You want to scream. You want to run. But where would you go? In larger towns, some fled to the forests. Others boarded up their homes and refused to leave, choosing isolation over infection. Some even, Nan said, prayed or whipped themselves in processions, hoping to earn God's mercy. But your village you stay, because there's nowhere else. And slowly the sickness passes, not because of medicine, not because of prayers, just because. The way a storm eventually moves on. When it's over, your village is different. Half empty, quieter. You no longer wave at familiar faces. You glance at empty houses and feel their silence like a weight. The fields grow wild. The goats wander farther than they used to. And the church bell is still. But you survived. You carry the scars in your memory, your stomach, your dreams. Sometimes you still wake up smelling that metallic stink, and it takes you a few heartbeats to realize it's gone. Life resumes, sort of, with so many dead labor is short. Ironically, this means yes, you have bargaining power. Some lords begin paying wages. Others offer incentives just to keep workers on their land. It's a strange twist disaster leading to dignity. Historians still argue whether the plague truly marked the beginning of the end of serfdom, or whether that's too neat a narrative. But something definitely changed. Power shifted, if just a little. And you start sleeping again. Not well, but better. You speak softer. You eat slower. You look at every living thing like a miracle. Even that rooster you once cursed. Because now you know, medieval times don't need swords or fires or chains to break you. Sometimes they just need a cough. You wake up to something strange laughter. After everything that's happened, it feels almost criminal. The few villagers left are rebuilding, replanting, repairing. There's even a festival rumoured to return this year, though it'll be quieter, dimmer. Grief is still stitched into every smile, and yet, here you are, alive, breathing, farming, but the peace is short-lived. Because now your feudal lord has a new idea. He wants war, again. Word arrives that a neighbouring lord has claimed the rights to a stretch of land that's always been his, which is, of course, completely debatable. Historians still argue whether these territorial feuds were about land honour or just the itchy boredom of a class that didn't till their own soil. Either way, you don't get a say. A herald rides through the village with a scroll declaring every able-bodied man must present himself for duty at sunrise 3 days from now. Congratulations. You've just been conscripted. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because now, even if you survive famine and plague, you're just one bad claim away from becoming cannon-well arrow fodder. You scramble to prepare. There's no real armour for you. Maybe a dented helmet, maybe a padded jerkin that smells suspiciously like mildew and wet sheep. You're handed a weapon you've never trained with, likely a long spear or crude axe. It's not elegant, it's not personal, it's disposable. Because sorry to say you're disposable, you're mainstream fact. Most medieval armies were composed not of elite knights in shiny armour, but of poorly trained conscripts, peasants like you drafted into service sometimes for pay, more often under obligation. The shining knight on horse trope, mostly a fiction when it comes to actual battlefield numbers. You're marched to the front alongside men just as nervous, just as clueless. Your feet blister in your worn shoes. You sleep under hedges. You eat dried peas and crusts hard enough to chip a molar. It rains. Of course it rains. Then one morning you arrive at a clearing. The captain barks orders which no one really understands. You're told to form up, hold the line, don't break, and wait. You grip your spear, your palms sweat. Someone vomits behind you. Then the trumpets sound. The ground shakes with the thunder of horses. The enemy charges their own ragtag bunch led by a few polished men on horseback. The clash is not cinematic. It's mud and screams and confusion. Arrows rain down. Someone shoves you forward, and suddenly you're in it. You jab your spear. You miss. You swing again. It catches something, maybe armor, maybe flesh. You don't look. You fall crawl, push yourself up. A man with blood on his face stares right at you, and for a second neither of you moves. Then he turns and runs. You survive, barely. When it's over, the field is a mess of torn flags, broken spears and crumpled bodies. No one's really sure who won. Both sides retreat, and you muddy bruisen, stunned and are told to march back home. For your efforts, you might receive a coin or two, maybe a nod from your lord, maybe nothing at all. The quirky tidbit. Some armies paid in salt beer or even thread, whatever was on hand and considered valuable. One record shows a soldier being compensated with half a pig and a jug of oil. You don't get a pension, a parade, or even a thank you, but you return a little different. older somehow, heavier even if you've lost weight. The village welcomes you quietly. No one cheers. Everyone knows what war does. You try to farm again. You try to forget. But you never really do. There's a scar now, maybe on your arm, maybe on your memory. You hear phantom battle cries at night. You flinch when someone yells. And your back aches more than it used to. Medieval war isn't about glory. It's about surviving the mud and the blood, the long marches, the cold nights, and the empty 1,000-yard stare of the man next to you. Historians still argue whether the average peasant took pride in serving or if they simply did it to avoid punishment. The truth is probably somewhere in between, obligation wrapped in fear, wrapped in the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it won't be you who dies today. You now look at your Lord differently. He, of course, never went to battle. He stayed behind managing affairs. He holds a feast to celebrate the strategic success. You are not invited. Your days return to tilling and mending and repairing what war cracked. The seasons move on, but the world seems meaner now, smaller. You have lived through pestilence and war, and it has not made you stronger. It has made you quieter. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times. By now, you've lasted several. But the weight of each one pulls you down like chainmail in deep water. And worse still, there's more to come. Because war is never the end. Your village never quite recovers from the war. The men who returned fewer than left are changed. The men who didn't are spoken of only in half sentences, usually while someone's fixing a fence or kneading bread. No one has the energy for memorials. Life just limps on, but there's no rest. Just as the fields begin to green again, the tax collector returns. You forgot about him, didn't you? You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because taxes are relentless. War or not plague or not famine or flood, your lord still wants his share. And he's not exactly accepting IOUs. This time the tax is steeper. To rebuild the defences, he says. Or maybe he blames it on a higher noble or the king himself. The reason changes. The hand in your pocket doesn't, so you cough up grain, chickens, a bolt of homespun wool. And still it isn't enough. The collector counts your offerings with bored precision, as if weighing feathers. You owe more. You suggest barter. He suggests prison. It's a crooked kind of math, isn't it? You fight his war, risk your life, survive, and now you owe him. The mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants were taxed into oblivion. Between church tithes, feudal dues, market fees, bridge tolls, and royal levies, some families lost over half their annual income, just trying to stay legal. And when you couldn't pay well, they took what they could. Tools, livestock, your only ox. And once, according to an English account, a man's daughter as repayment for a horse he couldn't replace. She was married off to the bailiff. Historians still argue whether such seizures were legal or simply tolerated abuses of power in the feudal system. But here's the kicker. None of this even touches the church tax. That's right. You've still got to pay God. Every 10th thing you harvest or breed is owed to the local parish. It's called the tithe. And while technically it's for the poor, your priest looks well-fed and smug in his imported velvet stole. You kneel at Mass trying not to resent him. But it's hard when your roof leaks and he's commissioning stained glass windows. And heaven help you if you're accused of holding back. Tithe evasion could land you in ecclesiastical court. Your case is judged by clergy, not peers. Your guilt is presumed. And your penance, possibly public flogging, possibly more donations. Definitely humiliation. The quirky tidbit. Some people try to outsmart the tithe by harvesting secretly at night or pretending their animals had miscarried. One farmer allegedly dyed his sheep to look sickly so the church wouldn't claim the healthiest. It worked until it didn't. The punishment was excommunication. You try to comply. You give what you can. But your larder grows emptier. You skip meals so your kids can eat. Your hands are blistered. Your back curves a little more each season, and still it's not enough. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because poverty isn't a pit. It's a treadmill. You keep moving just to stay where you are. And if you stumble, it grinds you under. One winter you can't pay. The tax collector returns with 2 guards. He marks your cottage with a bit of chalk. Seized. You plead, beg, offer labour. The guards just laugh. Then your neighbour steps forward. An older woman who's always seemed half mad but oddly observant. She whispers something to the collector, hands him a pouch, and your home is spared. Later you thank her. She only shrugs and mutters favour for a favour. You ask what kind. She doesn't answer. It's the first time you really understand how favours work here. There's the law, and then there's arrangement. The law is what's written. Arrangement is what's lived. Historians still argue whether peasants had any real agency in medieval society. Most agree it was limited, but not non-existent. Deals, loyalties, and quiet bartering undercut official rules every day. It's just that the stakes were higher, the consequences steeper. You now trade behind doors and hedges. Salted fish for firewood. A week of digging for a goat's milk cheese. It's a grey market, but it keeps you alive. Then spring comes. You plant, you hope, you pray. And that's when the church demands more. There's a new bishop, one concerned about moral decay. He institutes a visitation, basically an audit. Church officials go house to house checking for heretical books, loose morals, and inappropriate behavior. One neighbor gets fined for brewing beer without blessing the barrels. Another is shamed publicly for skipping Easter service. You're warned because your daughter doesn't cover her hair fully. You nod, apologize, keep your head down. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because there's no such thing as privacy. Your home isn't yours. Your body isn't yours. Even your thoughts aren't entirely yours if someone hears them wrong. You dream of leaving, of slipping away in the night to a freer town, a borderland somewhere new. But you know better. To leave your village without permission is to become a fugitive, a runaway serf. And if caught, you could be branded, literally, the mark of a deserter seared into your flesh. So you stay, and so does the weight, the taxes, the secrets, the exhaustion, but also the resilience. You're still here, somehow, and tomorrow you'll wake up and do it again. The tax burden never truly lightens, but you grow numb to it like a stone that's been rained on for too long to care about being wet. What surprises you now isn't the suffering, it's the occasional joy. A decent yield, a healthy child, a warm mug of something fermented shared under a star-swept sky. You still wouldn't last a day in medieval times, but somehow you've made it months. That's when a stranger arrives. He's not dressed like anyone you know. His boots are too fine, his accent too sharp, his cloak too clean. He introduces himself as a bailiff from the nearest city sent to recruit labourers for a new project, a cathedral. You think he's joking, but he's deadly serious. The Lord has offered up men from each village to serve a temporary labour tithe. It's a great honour, he says, which is medieval code for you can't say no. You're chosen. Of course you are. And so begins your journey to the city. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because medieval travel is a living nightmare. The roads are more suggestion than structure. Ruts run deep enough to swallow your cartwheel. Bandits prowl in forest bends. And the smell, oh the smell, like sweat dung and rain-soaked mildew, marinated over centuries. After a week of walking and dodging whatever that was, in the hedgerow, please, let it be a fox. You arrive at the city gates. It's chaos. People everywhere. Some shouting in Latin. Others bargaining in dialects you barely understand. Chickens flapping. Children weaving between carts. Bells ringing. A public crier yells something about a hanging. You blink. Waiter hanging. Welcome to your new workplace. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval cathedrals took decades, even centuries, to complete. Labor was largely done by conscripted peasants, skilled artisans and seasonal workers. It wasn't just spiritual work, it was architectural backbreaking. Your job isn't glamorous. You're not carving angels or measuring arches. You're mixing mortar with lime that burns your skin raw. You haul stones bigger than your head using wooden sleds and primitive cranes. Your boots disintegrate in a week. Your back, let's not talk about it. Lunch is brown bread, maybe a few beans. Water is always suspect, so most drink ale, which helps until it doesn't. By day 3, you can't tell if you're dizzy from dehydration or just existential dread. The quirky tidbit. Some masons left secret messages or weird little carvings in hard-to-reach spots. One bishop's butt is immortalized as a gargoyle. Another is shown being chased by geese. Artistic revenge in stone. And if you think the cathedral builders were all holy men, think again. Many workers are criminals working off sentences. Others are beggars. A few, according to a surviving payroll list, were women disguised as men, or simply tough enough not to be questioned. Historians still argue whether gender roles on work sites were truly rigid or more fluid in practice than law suggests. You meet all kinds here. A toothless man from Flanders who swears the world is round and full of sea monsters. A teen who hums hymns while sharpening chisels. A widow with arms stronger than yours who tells you which corners the foreman never checks. You're here for weeks, maybe months. You lose count. Then one morning a beam falls, a scream, dust. You run to help, but it's too late. The mason beneath it is crushed. The overseer says a prayer, makes a note, and calls for another man to take the spot. Just like that. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times because your life is valued less than the stone you break. Back home, people would notice if you vanished. Here you're another body, but you don't vanish. You endure. You learn how to dodge the worst jobs, how to fake a limp for half a day's rest, how to barter your good linen for a real pair of boots. You even befriend the widow. She gives you tips and you repay her with stolen honey from the foreman's stash. You both laugh harder than you have in months. One night, she pulls you up to the cathedral's halfway finished roof. The city twinkles below like candlelight. The stars above are even brighter. The wind is cold but clean. She grins. Worth it. You nod. For the first time in a long while, maybe it is. The next day your work ends. The bailiff says you've served your weeks. You can go. But do you? You hesitate. Because now you know what's out here. The world beyond your hedge. It's awful. But it's wide. Still your family is waiting. So you shoulder your packed nod to the widow and begin the walk home. A pigeon explodes above you, hawk strike. Feathers everywhere. Welcome back to medieval reality. You trudge back into your village looking like a weather-beaten statue-leaner, limping, maybe a little taller in spirit, but still bone-deep exhausted. A few neighbors barely recognize you. The children stare like you've returned from the moon. Your family, though, They run to you like it's a miracle. Because it is. You've survived, but you wouldn't last a day in medieval times, because even when you do survive, your reward isn't peace. It's reintegration into a place that moved on without you. The fields haven't stopped needing work. The animals haven't stopped braying. And your share of everything taxes labor. Guilt has only piled higher in your absence. Oh, good you're back, your cousin says, shoving a hoe into your hands before you've even finished your reunion stew. And yet, you're different now. You've seen how big the world is. How terrifying and filthy and astonishing it can be. You know that people speak 6 languages just a week's walk away. That cathedrals grow from dreams and dust. That death is random and resilience is muscle memory. Your hands have scars now, but also calluses where there were none. Still, time doesn't slow. Within a month, you're back in the rhythm, wake, work, weep quietly, in a haystack repeat. Except now you have this unbearable new trait curiosity. It gnaws at you like hunger. You look at the horizon and ache to know what's past it. Unfortunately, that kind of curiosity is dangerous here, because next comes winter, and medieval winter is no joke. Forget cozy fireside evenings and mugs of cocoa. The cold season here is endless mud rotting thatch, and a cough in the dark that turns into a death rattle by morning. You wear everything you own at once. You share body heat with goats. And you pray that this year the firewood lasts longer than the frost. Mainstream historical fact, winter in the Middle Ages could be deadly, not just from temperature, but from food scarcity. There were no supermarkets, no frozen stocks. If your harvest didn't suffice, or rats got into your grain store, or early snows killed your cabbages, you starved, or you scavenged, or you stole. One fringe tidbit, in some regions people reportedly chewed on leather or tree bark to dull their hunger. Others boiled moss. There's even a curious tale from a monastery that claimed to survive a famine thanks to a miraculous fish that reappeared in their well every Thursday. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor miracle or just a really confused eel. In your case, you're lucky. Sort of. You trade the cathedral boots, those real glorious toe-saving boots, for a sack of parsnips. You thank the stars roast them over a meager fire, and ignore the fact that your hut's roof now leaks in 5 separate places. Your body aches more than it used to. The cold sinks in, makes a home in your spine. Some days you forget what warmth even felt like. And the illnesses, they come in waves. Children burning with fevers. Elders too weak to move. You lie awake at night listening to the village cough, trying to gauge whose is the wettest. Whose will stop. But in the midst of all this darkness, something odd happens. A monk passes through. He's old, wobbly, smells like ink and peppermint. He carries scrolls, news, and something called a Book of Hours. It's a prayer calendar filled with stunning illustrations, gold-leafed saint animals playing musical instruments, even a snail fighting a knight. He lets the children hold it. One drops it in the mud. The monk just chuckles. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times, but if you did, you might discover that even here beauty insists on existing. That book stirs something in your village. You hear someone trying to imitate the pictures with berry juice on a scrap of cloth. A few old-timers begin telling stories they've never shared before. One child insists they're going to write songs for the angels. No one laughs at her. Then the snow melts. It always does. The rivers thaw. The birds return. A lamb is born and survives the night. And that familiar rhythm of medieval life starts beating again, rough, relentless, and louder than before. But now you hum while working. You look up when the wind shifts, half expecting to see the cathedral spire in the distance. You hold the little ones closer, and when a neighbour dies, because yes, of course someone dies, you stay up all night beside the fire telling the younger ones tales from the city, from the roof of the cathedral. From that night, the stars reflected in your eyes like they were made just for you. You've changed. They haven't. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times. But somehow you've lasted a whole year. And now they start calling you wise. The irony isn't lost on you. Spring unfurls itself slowly, like a timid cat, stretching after a long nap. The mud begins to firm beneath your feet. Colour creeps back into the world first in hesitant greens, then bold yellows and purples from stubborn wildflowers that no one planted but everyone thanks. You take in a deep breath. The air no longer tastes of smoke and rot. It's still not clean, not by modern standards, but after months of bracing against cold, it feels like champagne. You even catch yourself smiling. But here's the catch, just when things begin to feel manageable. Medieval life throws its final surprise at you. You're summoned. No, not for taxes though. Those are still very much a thing. You've been chosen, the local Lord Steward says, to help with the upcoming Midsummer Fair. Your name was pulled from the list of able-bodied villagers, which is flattering until you realize what this honor entails. You'll be working security. Yes, you, the same person who nearly passed out trying to carry a water pail during your first week. Turns out the fair is not just a fun gathering of peasants dancing around maypoles. It's chaos in a tunic. Vendors from distant towns, jugglers, pilgrims, thieves, fights between butchers and bakers. So many pies, so many pickpockets. You're handed a staff, just a stick really, and a badge that might as well be a kick me sign. Your job, keep the peace. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times, but somehow you've been roped into crowd control for a population that believes in astrology, trial by combat, and swearing on chicken bones. You try your best. You break up a fight between two rival cheese sellers. Spoiler, they both smell the same. You chase a boy who steals an apple and then vanishes under a cart. You even have to stop a drunken friar from dancing on top of the communion table. Quirky fact, there are records from some medieval town courts about monks being fined for drunkenness at festivals, and one infamous friar was reportedly found passed out with a roasted swan under each arm. But as chaotic as it all is, there's a joy in it. Laughter echoes, music plays. Someone starts singing an oddly catchy chant about onions. A travelling puppet troupe stages a miniature morality play starring talking sheep. And amidst the mess for a few shining hours, everyone forgets their blisters' debts and the looming spectre of plague. You look around at the fair in full swing. It's wild. It's weird. It's wonderful. Historians still argue whether these fairs were true sources of unity or carefully controlled opportunities for lords to monitor the lower classes. But for you in this moment, it doesn't matter. It feels like community. Then just as the sun begins to dip, something odd happens. A woman stands at the edge of the crowd. She's not dressed like anyone else here. Her clothes are neat, almost modern looking. She carries a scroll and wears a strange little badge. You blink. She's gone. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's too much mead. Or maybe, just maybe, you're not the only one time's messed with. Because here's the final twist. Even though you've been beaten, frozen, humiliated, half-starved, conscripted, and nearly trampled by a runaway pig cart, you've started to understand this world. You know when to sow and when to shear. You've learned which mushrooms are safe and which will leave you seeing dragons. You can tell which church bell means mass and which means run. You're not surviving anymore. You're living. And just when you feel like you might finally belong, that's when the sky changes. No, not literally. But something in the air, the rhythm, the way people look at you shifts. Like a dream winding down. You wake up sort of. Your room's dimly lit. There's a faint whirring sound. Maybe a fan. The blanket is soft. Too soft for straw. You're warm. You're clean. There's glass in the windows, and the smell of shampoo lingers somewhere. Was it real? Of course not. Or was it, maybe you wouldn't last a day in medieval times. But somehow, you did. And just maybe that strange little journey will stay with you. The echoes of church bells, the sting of icy wind, the scent of freshly tilled earth, the joy of warm parsnips shared around a fire. You've time-traveled and returned. Welcome back. Let's slow things down now. Feel the weight of the medieval world lift off your shoulders. The heavy cloak, the aching boots, the mud that clung to your every step. Let it all slip away as gently as a dream fades at dawn. Your hands once calloused from toil are still now. The cold that crept into your bones has melted into warmth, like the sun finally rising after a bitter winter. You're safe. Let your breath deepen steady, soft. Inhale the quiet of the present. Exhale the past. You've traveled far tonight through dirt roads and smoky inns across cathedral spires and under plague-scarred stars. You faced hunger, fear, and uncertainty. And even though it was all just words in the dark, your mind walked every step. You might still hear the distant echoes, church bells tolling from a nearby abbey, the faint laughter of villagers gathered near a flickering fire, the soft rustle of wind through thatched roofs. Let them go. There's nothing you need to do now. Nowhere you need to be. Just this quiet moment. Just this deep, calm breath. You're not in the Middle Ages anymore. You're here wrapped in stillness. Let sleep take its time. It's in no hurry. The stars are watching, and history can wait.